The crystalline palace of Celestia gleamed under the light of 3 moons. Captain Miles Carter stood at attention, his Earth military uniform feeling stiff and out of place among the flowing, luminescent garments of the alien court. The grand hall stretched before him like a cathedral built of light, with soaring arches that seemed to be made of frozen starlight rather than any material he recognized. "Captain Carter," the royal chamberlain's voice echoed, his skin the pale blue of all Celestians, but marked with the ornate silver patterns that designated his high rank. "You understand the gravity of your assignment?" Miles nodded once, sharply. "I do, sir. I am to serve as Princess Arania's personal guard until the coronation. No harm will come to her under my watch." The Chamberlain's 6-fingered hand made a gesture Miles had come to recognize as dismissive. "Pretty words from an Earthling. Your kind has a history of promising much and delivering little." Miles kept his face neutral, though his jaw tightened. Earth-Celestia relations had been strained ever since first contact 50 years ago. The technological exchange had benefited Earth, but many Celestians viewed humans as primitive, violent creatures, barely worth diplomatic consideration. That Miles was here at all, the first human ever assigned to the Royal Guard, was either a great honor or a calculated insult. He suspected the latter. "The princess approaches," announced a herald, and the entire hall fell silent. When Princess Arania entered, Miles understood why the diplomatic corps had described her as breathtaking, tall and graceful. Her skin was the deepest blue he had ever seen, almost indigo, with luminescent patterns that shifted subtly with her emotions. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, contained no whites or pupils, just swirling galaxies of silver and violet. Her hair, if it could be called that, resembled flowing liquid silver, moving with a life of its own around her shoulders and adorned with tiny crystals that caught the light. She moved toward the throne with a fluid grace that no human could match, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her like captured nebulae. Miles found himself wondering what evolutionary path had created beings of such ethereal beauty. Princess Arania seated herself and scanned the room, her galaxy eyes eventually settling on Miles. He felt a jolt of something, alarm, perhaps, or simply the weight of being noticed by someone so alien and powerful. "The human guard," she said, her voice musical and precise. "Approach." Miles stepped forward and knelt as he had been instructed, head bowed. "Rise," she commanded. "You look uncomfortable, Captain. Does our atmosphere not suit you?" "The atmosphere is fine, Your Highness," Miles replied, standing straight. "I am simply adjusting to the honor of your presence." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through her luminescent markings. "How diplomatic. I'm told your species excels at saying one thing while meaning another." "Sometimes, Your Highness, though I find honesty usually serves better." "Then, honestly, Captain, do you believe you can protect me from threats that have already claimed 3 Celestian guards?" The court fell silent, her directness obviously surprising them. Miles met her gaze steadily. "I believe I can, Your Highness. Different training sometimes sees threats from different angles. If something is targeting Celestian guards, perhaps a human perspective might notice what others have missed." She studied him for a long moment. "An interesting theory. We shall test it. You begin your duties immediately." The welcome ceremony that followed was elaborate, with dignitaries from across Celestia's vast empire presenting gifts and pledging fealty to the princess, who would soon become empress. Miles remained vigilant throughout, scanning faces, noticing patterns, cataloging potential threats. The diplomatic briefing had been clear, with the old emperor fading and Princess Arania set to ascend. Factions within the court were jockeying for position. Some might prefer she never reach the throne at all. As the 6th hour of ceremonies approached, Miles noticed something subtle. A small, metallic butterfly-like object hovering near one of the crystal chandeliers. It seemed out of place in the organic, flowing aesthetic of the palace. As it drifted lower, almost imperceptibly, Miles's instincts flared. Without warning, he lunged forward, pushing through startled courtiers toward the princess. "Your Highness, down!" he shouted, breaking all protocol. Confusion rippled through the court, but Miles was already at the throne, pulling the princess behind him just as the metallic butterfly burst into a shower of fine, glittering dust that descended toward where she had been sitting. "Poison!" someone screamed, as the particles began to sizzle upon contact with the throne. Palace guards rushed forward, energy shields activating around the royal dais. But too late. The assassin's weapon had already deployed. Only Miles's intervention had saved the princess from contact with what was clearly a lethal agent. In the chaos that followed, Miles kept his body between the princess and any potential threat, ushering her quickly toward a secure chamber while the royal guard contained the situation. Once inside the reinforced room, Aranaya turned to him, her galaxy eyes wide with shock and something else, calculation. "You saved my life," she stated simply. "How did you know?" The butterfly device was mechanical, not biological like most Celestian ornaments. It moved with purpose, not beauty. She tilted her head slightly. "You noticed this when my own guards did not." "As I said, Your Highness, different perspective." For the first time, she looked at him not as an inferior being, but as something worthy of study. "I was told humans were unrefined creatures, driven by base instincts and greed, that your appointment was a political necessity, not a security advantage." Miles's mouth tightened. "Some of us are driven by duty and honor, Your Highness." "Evidently." She moved to a crystalline cabinet and removed a small box made of what appeared to be blue jade. "This belongs to you now." She placed it in his hands, and Miles felt a strange warmth emanate from the object. "I don't understand." "It is a Celestian life debt token. By saving my life, you have earned my trust, something few of your kind have ever received." Her markings pulsed with complex patterns. "Keep it close. It marks you as under my protection now, as much as I am under yours." Miles looked down at the box, understanding the magnitude of what had just transpired. This wasn't merely an assignment anymore. It was becoming something far more complex. "Thank you, Your Highness." "Aranaya," she corrected, her voice softer. "When we are alone, you may call me Aranaya." As Miles nodded his acceptance of this unexpected honor, he realized that the attempt on her life had changed everything. Someone wanted the princess dead, and now he, an outsider, a human, was her best chance of survival. The thought should have been daunting, but instead, Miles felt a curious sense of purpose. What neither of them could have predicted was how this first act of protection would set in motion events that would transform not only their lives, but the future of two worlds. For in saving the princess, Miles had unwittingly placed himself at the center of Celestian politics, a dangerous place for any being, but especially for a human who had just proven himself far more capable than anyone had expected. In the darkened hallways of the palace's eastern wing, whispers already spread. The human guard had foiled the first attempt. Plans would need to be adjusted. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. The days following the assassination attempt found Miles in a strange, new reality. Where before he had been tolerated as a diplomatic necessity, now he was viewed with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant respect. The Celestian guards, initially dismissive, now watched him with wary eyes. Had he truly sensed danger where they had not? Or had he somehow been involved in the plot? For her part, Princess Aranaya insisted that Miles accompany her everywhere, a development that caused considerable consternation among the court. The royal chamberlain in particular seemed disturbed by this new arrangement. "Your Highness," he argued during a private audience that Miles was required to attend. While the human's actions were commendable, tradition demands that your personal security remain with those of noble Celestian lineage. Arinaya's luminescent patterns flashed in what Miles had come to recognize as irritation. Tradition also demands that I remain alive to take the throne. Chamberlain, the human has proven his worth. There are questions about how he knew to act when our own guards did not. Miles stepped forward. I'd be happy to explain my training and methodology to your security forces. Perhaps a collaborative approach would be beneficial. The Chamberlain's silver markings darkened. That won't be necessary, human. Our methods have protected the royal family for millennia. Except for 3 days ago, Aranaya noted dryly. When they failed rather spectacularly. She rose from her seat, her flowing robes rippling like water. Captain Carter remains my personal guard. This matter is closed. Later, as they walked the private crystal gardens where even the plants seemed fashioned from living glass, Aranaya spoke more candidly. You must understand, Captain, that your presence disrupts centuries of protocol. The old families believe they alone should have access to royal protection duties. Miles watched as she touched a crystalline flower, causing it to chime softly. Politics is politics, whatever the species. I understand I'm a complication. A necessary one. She turned to face him, her galaxy eyes reflecting the garden's prismatic light. I believe there are factions within the court who see my coronation as inconvenient. Because of your reform policies? She raised what might have been an eyebrow, though Celestians had no hair. You've studied our politics. I believed it would help me protect you better if I understood the motivations of potential threats. Impressive. She resumed walking, Miles a step behind. Yes, my proposed reforms trouble certain elements of our society. I believe the Empire has grown complacent, that we've allowed an unhealthy stratification to develop. The lower tiers, Miles nodded, recalling his briefing. Celestian society was rigidly hierarchical, with the luminescent patterns that covered their skin determining social standing from birth. The least marked, those with minimal patterns, served the most ornately marked without question. I want to change that, Aranaya said softly. Not to destroy our traditions, but to evolve them, to create opportunity based on merit, not birthmarkings. A dangerous position in any aristocratic system. Indeed. She stopped before a reflecting pool that mirrored the 3 moons above. I would like you to accompany me tomorrow on an unofficial excursion. Miles tensed. Outside the palace. To the lower city. I need to see conditions there myself, not filtered through official reports. Your Highness, Aranaya, that would be extraordinarily dangerous right now. Her markings pulsed with what might have been amusement. That's why I have you, Captain, unless you don't feel equal to the task. Miles recognized the challenge for what it was. I'll protect you wherever you choose to go, but I recommend minimal entourage, disguises, and at least informing the head of security. Agreed to the first 2. As for informing security, her markings darkened. I'm no longer certain whom to trust among them. The realization hit Miles with sudden clarity. You believe the assassination attempt came from within. I know it did. Her voice was hard now, all trace of amusement gone. The butterfly device was of Celestian manufacture, requiring high-level access codes to enter the ceremonial hall. Someone close to me wishes me dead. Captain. Then we find out who, Miles said simply, and we ensure they fail. For a moment, something flashed across her alien features. Relief, perhaps, at having someone to trust in a court full of potential enemies. Tomorrow, then, she said. Dawn, before the court awakens. Wear this. She handed him a small crystal that pulsed with gentle light. It will help you blend in, somewhat. That night, in his quarters, Miles examined the blue jade box Aranaya had given him. It seemed to pulse with its own inner light, warm to the touch. He wondered what exactly a life debt token signified in Celestian culture, making a mental note to research it when time permitted. For now, though, he needed to prepare for tomorrow's excursion. If Arinaya was right, if the threat came from within the palace itself, then venturing into the city might actually be safer than remaining inside these crystal walls. But the lower city would have its own dangers, especially for a princess who had likely never ventured there before. Miles checked his weapons, the standard-issue pulse pistol allowed by diplomatic agreement, and the ceramic knife hidden in his boot that wasn't. If they encountered trouble, he would be ready. What he couldn't prepare for was the growing sense that his role here was becoming something far beyond a simple security assignment. The way Arinaya looked at him, not as a subordinate, not even as an equal, but as something she couldn't quite categorize, stirred emotions he hadn't anticipated. He placed the jade box carefully beside his bed and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring them one step closer to discovering who wanted the princess dead, and why. Dawn on Celestia was unlike anything Miles had experienced on Earth. The light didn't simply appear. It seemed to crystallize from the air itself, refracting through the city's translucent structures until the world shimmered like an ocean of diamonds. Miles waited at the designated meeting point, a small servant's exit near the palace kitchens, wearing the crystal Arinaya had given him. It hung around his neck, emitting a subtle field that adjusted his appearance to anyone looking directly at him. Not enough to disguise him completely, but enough to make him less obviously human. Arinaya arrived precisely on time, though Miles almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the elaborate robes and crystal adornments. Instead, she wore a simple gray covering that concealed most of her luminescent patterns. Only her face remained uncovered, and even there, she had somehow dimmed the brightness of her markings. "You look—" Miles searched for an appropriate word. "Common?" she suggested, with what might have been a smile. "I was going to say different." "Good. Different is what we need today." She handed him a small communication device. "These are keyed only to each other. If we're separated, use it immediately." They slipped out through the kitchen gardens, past drowsy guards who barely glanced at what appeared to be two ordinary Celestians heading to early work duties. The lower city sprawled below the floating crystal palace, connected by gravity-defying bridges that looked too delicate to support weight, yet somehow held firm underfoot. As they descended, the immaculate perfection of the upper city gave way to increasingly utilitarian structures. The crystal quality diminished. Instead of clear, flawless surfaces, these buildings were cloudy, some cracked or patched with materials that didn't match. The Celestians they passed changed too. Instead of the vibrant, complex patterns Miles had seen in the court, these citizens bore simpler markings, some with barely any luminescence at all. They moved with less of the fluid grace that characterized the nobles, their movements more hurried, more human, Miles thought. "What do you see, Captain?" Arinaya asked quietly as they navigated a crowded market square, where vendors sold what appeared to be basic necessities rather than luxuries. "Inequality," he answered honestly. "But that's true of most societies." "Is it this pronounced on Earth?" Miles considered. "In some places. We've had our own struggles with class systems, though ours are usually economic rather than biological." Arinaya nodded, her eyes taking in everything: the worn clothing, the tired faces, the way people immediately moved aside when someone with brighter markings approached. "They are not biological for us either. Not really. The markings are largely hereditary. Yes. But their brightness is affected by access to certain elements in diet and environment. Keep a child in darkness. Feed them the simplest foods, and their patterns will never fully develop." Miles felt a chill at the implication. "That's barbaric," she finished. "Yes, a system designed to perpetuate itself. Children of the lower tiers never developed the bright patterns that would allow them social mobility. They continued deeper into the city, and the conditions steadily worsened. In one district, Miles noticed workers handling what appeared to be raw crystal, breaking it down with primitive tools. Their hands were covered in protective wrappings, but many showed signs of injury: burned skin, damaged patterns. Crystal mining byproducts, Aranaya explained, seeing his focus. The material that isn't pure enough for the upper city gets processed here. It's hazardous work. And necessary work, came a voice from behind them. Miles turned instantly, positioning himself between Aranaya and the speaker, a tall Celestian male with unusually asymmetrical markings that curved around one side of his face, but left the other nearly blank. "Peace, Guardian," the stranger said, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I mean no harm to you or your companion." The slight pause suggested he recognized Aranaya despite her disguise. "Who are you?" Miles demanded, not relaxing his stance. "Someone who has waited a long time to meet the princess, who would change everything." He bowed slightly. "I am Lyrics, coordinator of the Lower Tier Advocacy Coalition. And you, Your Highness, are taking a terrible risk by coming here." Aranaya stepped out from behind Miles, ignoring his gesture to stay back. "How did you know?" Lyrix's partial markings pulsed with amusement. "Those of us who live in shadows learn to see clearly in dim light. Your disguise would fool the upper tiers, who never look closely at us anyway. But to us, you shine like a beacon." "Then others will recognize me too," she said, concerned. "Not all have my particular talents. But yes, it would be wise to move somewhere less exposed." He gestured toward a narrow alley. "My workshop is nearby. We can speak safely there." Miles and Aranaya exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the plan, but if they were already compromised, continuing in the open would be foolish. "Lead the way," Aranaya decided. "But know that my guard is very protective and extremely capable." Lyrix nodded respectfully to Miles. "I witnessed his intervention at the welcome ceremony. Most impressive for an off-worlder." Miles frowned. "You were at the palace." "I serve on the maintenance crew," Lyrix explained, as he led them through winding alleys. Many lower tiers work in the palace, invisible to the nobles, but essential to its function. We see much. His workshop turned out to be a small, but well-organized space, filled with crystal components and delicate tools. Models of various mechanical devices hung from the ceiling, including, Miles noted with alarm, a small metallic butterfly identical to the assassination weapon. "You recognize it," Lyric said, following his gaze. "Good. It means you're as observant as I hoped." "Explain," Aranaya commanded, her royal demeanor breaking through her disguise. "These devices are royal security technology, developed to deliver emergency medical countermeasures to the royal family if needed. I helped design the original prototypes before being reassigned to lower duties." He touched the blank side of his face briefly. "They were never meant to be weapons." "Yet one nearly killed me," Aranaya said. "Because someone has perverted their purpose. Only 3 people have the authority to program these devices: the royal chamberlain, the head of security, and the imperial physician." Miles processed this information. "You're saying one of them is behind the assassination attempt?" "Or someone has stolen their access codes," Lyrics acknowledged. "Either way, the threat is at the highest level of your court, Princess." Aranaya's markings pulsed with barely contained emotion. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I've been tracking unusual activities within the palace systems. Someone has been accessing restricted areas of the security network, particularly around your private chambers." "Can you find out who?" Miles asked. Lyrix hesitated. "Possibly, but it would require access to the Central Palace mainframe, something I no longer have." "I can provide that," Aranaya said immediately. "Your Highness," Miles cautioned. "If what he says is true, Giving him access could alert whoever is behind this. Not if we're careful, Lyrics countered. I don't need physical access. Just a bypass code entered at any terminal. Aranaya considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll provide it. But Captain Carter will verify everything you discover. Of course. Lyrics moved to a workbench and retrieved a small crystal disk. This will help identify the modified butterflies. They emit a specific frequency most Celestians can't detect, but your human companion might. Miles took the device, examining it carefully. Why are you helping us? Lyrix's partial markings dimmed slightly. Because the princess's reforms are our only hope for real change. Many in the lower tiers have waited generations for a ruler who sees us as people, not just resources to be used. He looked directly at Aranaya. You have more allies than you know, Your Highness, but also more enemies. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant commotion, shouts, and the distinct whine of security vehicles. Palace guards, Lyrics said, moving quickly to a viewing portal. They're conducting a sweep of the district. Someone must have reported seeing you. We need to return, Miles decided, checking the exits. A different route than we came. There's a maintenance shaft that leads to the upper-tier gardens, Lyrics offered. Little used and minimally monitored. As they prepared to leave, Aranaya touched Lyrics's arm, a startlingly familiar gesture for a royal to a lower tier. Thank you. When I take the throne, your assistance will be remembered. Stay alive to take it, Princess. That will be thanks enough. Their journey back was tense but uneventful, the maintenance shaft bringing them into a secluded area of the palace gardens. As they emerged into the familiar crystal landscape, Miles finally allowed himself to relax slightly. That was illuminating, Aranaya said as they made their way toward her chambers. And disturbing. Do you trust him? Miles asked. Lyrics? I'm not sure. His information seems genuine, but in Celestian politics, few are exactly what they appear. She glanced at Miles. Except perhaps you, Captain. Before Miles could respond, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a metallic glint near one of the garden sculptures. Without hesitation, he shoved Aranaya aside, diving with her behind a crystal formation, just as a shower of glittering particles erupted where they had been standing. Another butterfly! Aranaya gasped as the particles sizzled against the garden path. But this attack was different. The particles didn't merely dissolve upon landing. They reconfigured, forming a fine mist that began to drift toward their hiding place. Adaptive payload, Miles realized, pulling Aranaya further back. It's tracking us. The mist shimmered with an iridescent quality that reminded Miles of oil on water. Beautiful, but deadly. He scanned their surroundings, looking for an escape route. The palace entrance was too far. The mist would overtake them before they reached it. The fountain. Aranaya pointed to an ornate crystal structure from which a clear liquid that wasn't quite water flowed. Photon rain dissolves in liquid. Miles didn't question how she knew this was photon rain. He simply acted, half dragging her toward the fountain as the mist closed in. They reached the basin, just as the first tendrils of mist touched Miles's exposed hand, instantly burning through his skin with searing pain. They plunged into the fountain, the crystal-clear liquid closing over them. Through the distortion, Miles could see the mist hovering at the surface, unable to penetrate. His burned hand throbbed, but the liquid seemed to soothe the injury, the pain already diminishing. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, palace guards arrived, containment fields activating to capture the deadly mist. Miles and Aranaya emerged from the fountain, soaked but alive. Your Highness, the captain of the Royal Guard rushed forward. We detected unauthorized weapons discharge. Are you harmed? Thanks to Captain Carter. No, Aranaya replied, her voice regal despite her bedraggled appearance. But this is the second attempt on my life in the heart of the palace. I require answers. Captain Zyrex. The Celestian Guard captain's markings pulsed with what might have been shame or anger. Miles couldn't tell which. We are investigating, Your Highness. The weapon signature matches the previous attack. Then, your investigation has failed to prevent a recurrence, she said coldly. Perhaps you should consult with Captain Carter, who has now twice saved me when your guards could not. The implied criticism hit home. Captain Zyrex's markings darkened visibly. As you wish, Your Highness. He turned to Miles, his expression unreadable to human eyes. We would value your perspective, Captain. Miles nodded, knowing he had just made another enemy. But as he looked at Aranaya, her disguise ruined, her royal bearing reasserted, even while dripping with fountain liquid, he found he didn't care. Something had changed during their excursion to the lower city. He had seen her not just as a princess to be protected, but as a leader with a vision worth fighting for. And something had changed in her too. The way she looked at him now held a new awareness, an acknowledgement that transcended their formal roles. In saving her life again, Miles had cemented a bond neither of them had anticipated, one that would soon be tested far beyond mere physical protection. For as they would soon discover, the enemies arrayed against them were playing a far more complex game than simple assassination. The fate of not just Aranaya, but the entire Celestian Empire, hung in the balance. In the aftermath of the second assassination attempt, the palace was in turmoil. Security protocols were tightened, guards posted at every entrance, and Aranaya's chambers were placed under constant surveillance. Miles found himself at the center of a quiet power struggle between Earth's diplomatic corps, who were suddenly interested in his unexpected prominence, and the Celestian security forces, who viewed his success as a humiliating failure on their part. Through it all, Aranaya remained outwardly calm, continuing her preparations for the coronation while privately working with Miles to uncover the conspiracy against her. The information from Lyrics had proven valuable. With the bypass code Aranaya provided, they had confirmed that someone had indeed reprogrammed the butterfly devices from their medical purpose to weaponized delivery systems. But identifying exactly who had done this remained elusive. The access had been carefully masked, routed through multiple security protocols in a way that suggested inside knowledge of the palace systems. 3 days after the garden attack, Miles was summoned to a private audience with Aranaya in her personal study, a vast room filled with ancient crystal tablets and what appeared to be living data organisms that pulsed with information. "Captain," she greeted him, dismissing her attendants with a gesture. "I have news." Miles waited until they were alone before speaking. "What have you discovered?" "My brother has returned from the outer colonies." Her galaxy eyes showed complex emotions Miles couldn't fully interpret. Prince Talaran was not expected until the coronation itself. Miles recalled the briefing on the royal family. Prince Talaran was the younger son of the Emperor, second in line to the throne. He had been serving as governor of Celestia's most distant territories, a position that kept him far from court politics. "Do you trust him?" Miles asked directly. Aranaya's markings pulsed with what might have been amusement. How refreshingly human to ask such a question so bluntly. She moved to a crystal viewport that overlooked the city below. "Talaran and I were close as children. He has always supported my reform policies, at least publicly. But his sudden return, particularly after 2 assassination attempts." She turned back to Miles. "It raises questions." "You think he might be behind the attacks?" "I think anyone with a claim to the throne must be considered. Talaran has always lived in my shadow. Perhaps he grew tired of waiting." Miles considered this. "Would you like me to investigate him?" "No. I want you to meet him." Aranaya's markings brightened. He's requested a private audience with me this evening. I want you present. As guard or participant? Both. Talaran has always been fascinated by other species. Your presence will distract him, perhaps reveal things he might otherwise conceal. The meeting was set for the Jade Gardens, a secluded area of the palace where the plants themselves were fashioned of living gemstone, their crystalline leaves chiming softly in the artificial breeze. Miles arrived early, scouting the location for potential threats and escape routes, a habit that had served him well in his military career. Prince Talaran arrived precisely on time, accompanied by only 2 guards whom he dismissed upon seeing Arinaya, already present with Miles. The prince was shorter than his sister, his skin a lighter shade of blue, his markings less elaborate but somehow more dynamic, shifting and changing with every emotion. "Sister," he greeted Arinaya warmly, embracing her in the Celestian fashion, hands touching the sides of the face. "You look well, despite the attempts on your life." "Thanks to Captain Carter," she replied, gesturing to Miles. "My human guardian has proven remarkably effective." Talaran turned his attention to Miles, his galaxy eyes showing genuine curiosity. "Captain, your reputation precedes you. The court speaks of little else than the human who twice saved our future empress." Miles bowed slightly. "I was doing my duty, Your Highness." "With exceptional skill." Talaran circled Miles slowly, examining him from all angles. "I've studied human physiology. Slower reflexes than Celestians, weaker sensory perception, shorter lifespan. Yet you detected threats our own guards missed. Fascinating. Perhaps those weaknesses give rise to compensatory strengths," Miles suggested, maintaining a neutral tone despite the clinical assessment. Talaran's markings flashed with delight. "Well said. Necessity breeds adaptation." He turned back to his sister. "You've chosen well, Arinaya." "I didn't choose him. The diplomatic corps assigned him." "Then fortune favors you." Talaran settled onto a crystal bench, gesturing for them to join him. "Now, tell me everything about these attacks. The official reports are frustratingly vague." As Arinaya related the details, Miles watched Talaran carefully. The prince's reactions seemed genuine: concern at the methods, anger at the security failures, thoughtful analysis of the implications. If he was involved in the conspiracy, he was an exceptional actor. "And you suspect high-level involvement?" Talaran asked when she finished. "The evidence points that way," Arinaya confirmed. "Only 3 people have the necessary access." "4," Talaran corrected quietly. Both Miles and Arinaya looked at him sharply. "Explain," Arinaya demanded. "Father also has access, of course, though in his current state." Talaran's markings dimmed with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "He can barely recognize his own children, let alone program assassination devices." Miles filed this information away. The Emperor's declining health was well known, but the extent of his deterioration had been kept from public knowledge. "There's something else you should know," Talaran continued, leaning closer. "I didn't return solely because of the attempts on your life. I've been conducting my own investigation into certain irregularities in the outer colonies." "What kind of irregularities?" Miles asked. "Resource allocation. Primarily, crystal shipments diverted, security personnel reassigned without proper authorization." Talaran produced a small data crystal, all approved using high-level palace security codes. Arinaya took the crystal, her expression troubled. "The same access level required for the butterfly devices." "Precisely." Talaran's markings pulsed rapidly. "Someone is building something, sister. Something that requires significant resources and secrecy." "A coup?" Miles suggested. "Perhaps. Or something worse." Talaran stood, pacing the garden path. The technologies being assembled could form components of a planetary defense system, or a weapon. The implications hung in the air between them. Celestian technology, was centuries beyond Earth's. A weapon, built with their advanced understanding of energy manipulation, could be devastating. "I need to return to my quarters," Talarin said suddenly. "I've traveled far and need restoration. But we should continue this discussion tomorrow." He touched his sister's face gently. "Be careful, Aranaya. Trust few." After he departed, Miles and Aranaya remained in the garden, both lost in thought. "What do you think?" she finally asked. "He seems genuine," Miles admitted. "But I'm not familiar enough with Celestian expressions to be certain. He was always the better politician between us." She examined the data crystal Talarin had provided. This could be valuable information, or careful misinformation. "We need to verify it independently." Aranaya nodded. "I know someone who can help with that, but it will require another excursion outside the palace." Miles frowned. "After 2 attempts here, is that wise?" "Perhaps not. But neither is remaining in a place where my enemies clearly have access and influence." Her galaxy eyes met his. "I trust you to keep me safe, Miles." It was the first time she had used his first name, the formality between them slipping momentarily. The sound of it in her musical voice affected him more than he wanted to acknowledge. "Then we go together," he said simply, "but with better preparation this time." The following day brought new complications. The royal chamberlain announced that due to the security concerns, Aranaya's public appearances would be curtailed until after the coronation, a move that effectively isolated her from both her supporters and the general population. "This is not a request, Your Highness," the chamberlain stated when Aranaya objected. "The Security Council has voted unanimously." "Has it?" Aranaya's markings flashed dangerously. "And was my brother part of this vote?" Prince Talarin abstained, citing his recent arrival. "But he expressed concern for your safety." After the chamberlain left, Aranaya turned to Miles, her expression troubled. "They're trying to control me, limit my influence before the coronation." "Or genuinely protect you," Miles suggested, though he shared her suspicions. "Perhaps both." She moved to her private terminal, accessing palace records. "We need to move quickly, tonight. I want to visit the Central Archives." "The archives? What will we find there?" "Access logs. If someone has been using high-level codes for both the assassination attempts and the colonial irregularities, the original login data might still exist in the archive's backup systems." She turned to him, her expression determined. "Will you accompany me?" Miles knew this was more than a security request. It was a test of his loyalty to her personally, beyond his assigned duties. "Of course." That night, they slipped out of the royal quarters through a series of maintenance passages Aranaya knew from childhood explorations. The Central Archives was a vast crystal dome at the heart of the palace complex, housing the accumulated knowledge of the Celestian Empire in living crystal matrices that pulsed with data. "The backup systems are subsurface," Aranaya explained as they navigated the darkened facility. "Older technology, but separate from the main network and harder to tamper with." They descended through crystalline spiral stairs to a chamber that felt ancient compared to the gleaming technology of the upper palace. Here, data was stored in physical crystal rods arranged in precise geometric patterns. "These contain records from the past 50 cycles," Aranaya said, approaching a central console, "including all high-level access authorizations." As she began searching the system, Miles kept watch, the encounter with Talarin playing through his mind. The prince had seemed sincere, but in his experience, those who rose to power in any society rarely achieved it through complete honesty. "Here," Aranaya said suddenly, her voice tight. "Access logs for the security systems that control the butterfly devices." And her markings pulsed with shock. "Miles, look at this." He moved to her side, studying the crystalline display. The access logs showed a clear pattern. Someone had indeed been using high-level authorization codes to reprogram the devices. But the user identifier was unexpected. "These are my codes," Aranaya whispered. "Someone is using access keyed to my biological signature." Miles's mind raced through the implications. "That's why security hasn't caught them. The system thinks it's you." "But that's impossible. Biological signatures can't be duplicated." "They can be if someone has access to your genetic material," Miles thought quickly. "Who has that kind of access?" "The Imperial physician takes regular samples for health monitoring. And—" She hesitated. "My brother and father would have compatible markers. Close family members can sometimes bypass Celestian biosecurity." Before they could discuss further, a soft chime echoed through the chamber, an alert from the motion sensors Miles had placed at the entrance. "Someone's coming," he whispered, drawing his pulse pistol. "How many exits are there?" "Just the stairs we came down and an emergency shaft," Aranaya replied, quickly erasing evidence of their search from the console. Miles made a quick decision. The shaft. Now. They had just reached the hidden panel concealing the emergency exit when the lights in the archive chamber flared to life. Miles pushed Aranaya behind him, weapon ready. Captain Zyrex of the Royal Guard stood at the base of the stairs, flanked by 4 guards with weapons drawn. "Your Highness," he called, his tone neutral. "This area is restricted during nighttime hours." "I am aware of palace protocols, Captain," Aranaya replied, stepping out from behind Miles despite his protective gesture. "As Princess Regent, all areas of the palace are open to me." "Of course, Your Highness. However, given recent events, we were concerned when you left your chambers unannounced." Zyrex's gaze shifted to Miles, his markings pulsing with what might have been suspicion. "Particularly in the company of only your human guard." The emphasis on human wasn't lost on Miles. "The princess required discretion for her research, Captain. Had we alerted security to our movements, that discretion would have been compromised." "Researching what precisely?" Zyrex asked, moving closer, his guards spreading out to cover the room. "Matters of state succession," Aranaya replied smoothly. "With my coronation approaching, I needed to review certain historical precedents." It was a plausible explanation, but Miles could tell Zyrex didn't fully believe it. Nevertheless, the captain couldn't openly challenge the princess. "I see. Then allow us to escort you safely back to your chambers, Your Highness. These are dangerous times." "Indeed they are, Captain," Aranaya's voice was cool. "Though one wonders where these dangers truly originate." The walk back to the royal quarters was tense, with Zyrex himself leading the escort and additional guards joining them at each junction. It was, Miles realized, both protection and surveillance. Once they were alone in Aranaya's private chambers, she turned to him, her markings dim with concern. "They were waiting for us. Someone knew we would go to the archives tonight." "Talaran," Miles suggested. "You told him we were investigating." "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone is monitoring all my movements." She moved to a crystal panel on the wall and activated a privacy field that hummed softly around them. "What we discovered changes everything. If someone can use my access codes, any evidence could be manipulated to implicate others, or me." Miles nodded, the political ramifications becoming clear. "They could make it appear that you staged the assassination attempts yourself, to gain sympathy or eliminate rivals." "Exactly." Aranaya's galaxy eyes showed a weariness Miles hadn't seen before. "The coronation is in 7 days. If they can't kill me, perhaps they plan to discredit me instead. Then we need to find out who they are." Miles stepped closer, lowering his voice despite the privacy field. "Your brother, the Chamberlain, Captain Zyrex, all have motive and opportunity." "And the Imperial physician," Aranaya added. "Dr. Vex has served my family for decades, but his loyalty has always been to the Empire's traditions, not its progress." Miles considered their options. We need to set a trap. If someone is using your biometric signature, we need to catch them in the act. How? By giving them something too tempting to resist. A chance to access even higher-level systems. Something that would draw them out. An idea formed in Miles's mind. The coronation security protocols. If we make it known that you're personally reviewing and enhancing them, they would need to access them to ensure their plans succeed. Aranaya finished, her markings brightening with understanding. Exactly, but we'll be watching when they do. The plan took shape between them, a delicate dance of trust and strategy. As they worked through the details, Miles became increasingly aware of a shift in their relationship. The formal boundaries between princess and guard were blurring, replaced by something more equal, more personal. When Aranaya's hand briefly touched his, while pointing out a security schematic, the contact sent an unexpected current through him. She noticed his reaction, her galaxy eyes meeting his with a question he wasn't sure how to answer. "Miles," she said softly, using his first name again. "On your world, are there prohibitions against connections between different species?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "There are no other sentient species on Earth, so it's not something we've had to consider. But if there were..." Miles chose his words carefully. "Humans have a long history of fearing differences, but we also have a capacity for acceptance and adaptation. Why do you ask?" Her luminescent patterns shifted in what he now recognized as embarrassment. "Celestian royalty is expected to maintain bloodline purity. Connections outside our species are unprecedented." The implication hung between them, neither willing to address it directly. "We should focus on the immediate threat," Miles said finally, returning to the security plans. "Personal considerations can wait until your safety is assured." Aranaya nodded, though her markings suggested disappointment. "Of course, you're right." As they continued working, Miles tried to ignore the realization that was forming in his mind, that his commitment to Aranaya's safety had become something far more complex than professional duty. The blue jade life debt token she had given him seemed to pulse warmer against his chest, as if responding to his thoughts. What neither of them could know was that their enemies were already moving forward with the next phase of their plan. One that would test not just Miles's ability to protect Aranaya, but his willingness to sacrifice everything for her. The trap was set the following day. Aranaya formally requested access to the coronation security protocols, making sure the request was logged in the palace systems, where anyone monitoring her activities would notice. She then spent several conspicuous hours in the security center, personally reviewing and enhancing the measures with Miles at her side. What only they knew was that the changes she made were actually designed to reveal anyone attempting to access the system using her biometric signature. A silent alert would be sent to a device Miles carried, allowing them to track the intrusion to its source. As evening approached, Aranaya was summoned to an unexpected council meeting called by the Chamberlain. "I must attend," she told Miles reluctantly. "To refuse would arouse suspicion." "I'll monitor the alert system," Miles assured her. "If anyone takes the bait, I'll know immediately." "Be careful," she said, her markings pulsing with concern. "If we're right about a conspiracy at the highest levels, you could be walking into significant danger." "Danger is part of the job description," Miles replied with a slight smile. After Aranaya departed for the council chambers, Miles positioned himself in a central location where he could respond quickly to any alert. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours of tense anticipation, knowing that somewhere in the vast Crystal Palace, their enemies were watching and planning. Just after midnight, the alert triggered. Someone was accessing the coronation security protocols using Aranaya's signature. The location indicator pointed to the east wing of the palace, near the private medical facilities. Miles moved quickly, but cautiously, keeping to the shadows, his pulse pistol ready. The east wing was quieter than the main palace, with fewer guards and staff at this late hour. The alert led him to a secluded laboratory, adjacent to the Imperial Physician's main office. Through a crystal viewport, Miles could see a solitary figure working at a console, their back to the door. The room's lighting made it difficult to identify them clearly, but their movements were purposeful, practiced. Miles considered his options. He could call for backup, but that risked alerting the suspect and losing their best chance to identify the conspiracy. Or he could confront them directly, using the element of surprise. Decision made. He overrode the door lock using the security codes Aranaya had provided and slipped into the room, weapon raised. "Don't move," he commanded. The figure froze momentarily, then slowly turned. To Miles's shock, he found himself facing Prince Talaran. "Captain Carter," the prince said calmly, his markings pulsing rapidly. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You're proving irritatingly competent." "Step away from the console," Miles ordered, keeping his weapon trained on the prince. "Or what? You'll shoot the brother of your princess?" Talaran's galaxy eyes showed more curiosity than fear. "I wonder how that would play in the diplomatic circles. An Earth representative assassinating Celestian royalty. I'm not here to kill you, just to understand what you're doing." Miles moved closer, positioning himself between Talaran and the exit. "Using your sister's biometric signature to access restricted systems is a serious offense, even for a prince." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Talaran's markings flashed with what might have been amusement. "You understand so little, human." Before Miles could respond, the door behind him slid open. He spun, ready to face a new threat, only to find Aranaya standing there, her expression unreadable. "Your Highness," he began, but stopped when he saw who accompanied her, Captain Zyrex and the Imperial Physician. "Dr. Vex." "The human has discovered our work," Talaran said to the newcomers. "Earlier than anticipated." Miles looked between the four Celestians, realization dawning. "You're all working together." "Of course we are," Dr. Vex replied, his elderly features set in stern lines. "To save the Empire from a threat it doesn't yet understand." Aranaya stepped forward, her galaxy eyes fixed on Miles. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. We had hoped to bring you into our confidence more gradually." Miles kept his weapon ready, trust splintering. "What exactly am I finding out, Your Highness?" "The assassination attempts were staged," she explained, her voice gentle. "Controlled scenarios to test your capabilities and loyalty." "Staged?" Miles felt cold disbelief. "The photon rain that burned my hand was staged?" "A diluted formula," Dr. Vex interjected. "Painful but not lethal. We needed your genuine reaction." "Why?" Miles demanded, anger rising. "What possible reason could justify this deception?" Talaran moved to a larger console and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. A three-dimensional map of Celestian space appeared, with a cluster of unidentified objects approaching from the outer territories. "This is why," the prince said gravely. "An invasion force, Captain. One that has already overwhelmed 3 of our colony worlds." Miles studied the display, his military training allowing him to recognize the tactical formation. "Who are they?" "We call them the Void Collective," Aranaya explained. "A species from beyond our mapped space, with technology that rivals our own. They communicate through electromagnetic pulses that our telepathic abilities cannot interpret. But human brains," Dr. Vex continued, "are structured differently. Our tests suggest your species might be resistant to their influence and capable of perceiving their communication patterns." The pieces began to fall into place in Miles's mind. "You needed to test if I could detect threats others missed." "And you did," Talaran confirmed. "The butterfly devices emit energy signatures similar to void technology. You sensed them when our own guards could not." "The excursion to the lower city?" "Partly genuine," Aranaya admitted. I do want reforms, but we also needed to see how you would react to unfamiliar environments and unexpected threats. Captain Zyrex spoke for the first time. The Void Collective will reach Celestia in 17 days, just after the coronation. We have been preparing defenses, but our conventional forces have proven ineffective against their technology. What does this have to do with me? Miles asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. We need an intermediary, Aranaya said, stepping closer to him. Someone who can communicate with them, understand their intentions, perhaps negotiate. Our scientists believe a human mind, particularly one with your specialized training, might succeed where we have failed. And if negotiation fails? Then we need someone who can identify their weaknesses, Talaran said bluntly. Someone who sees patterns others miss. Miles lowered his weapon slowly, processing everything. You could have simply told me this from the beginning. Could we? Aranaya's galaxy eyes held his. Would Earth have allowed their representative to be involved in an alien conflict if they knew the risks? Would you have agreed to face an unknown enemy with potentially lethal consequences? You didn't give me the choice, Miles said, an edge in his voice. We're giving it to you now, she replied softly. Now that you've proven yourself capable. You can return to Earth immediately, resume your normal duties, or you can help us save billions of lives across the Empire. The room fell silent as Miles considered. The deception stung, particularly from Aranaya, whom he had come to. What? Trust? Admire? The emotions were too complex to untangle in this moment of crisis. I need to see everything, he said finally. All the data you have on this Void Collective, their tactics, their technology, recordings of their communication patterns. If I'm going to help, I need complete information. Relief visibly washed through Aranaya's markings. You'll have it all. This doesn't mean I've forgiven the deception, Miles clarified. But I won't abandon people in danger, whatever species they may be. A commendably human sentiment, Talaran observed, though without mockery. As the others began organizing the information Miles had requested, Aranaya approached him privately. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice low. Something that wasn't part of the deception. Miles looked at her questioningly. The life debt token I gave you. It was genuine, as was everything I said about trusting you. Her markings pulsed with emotions Miles couldn't fully interpret. And whatever connection has formed between us, that was never part of any plan. Miles wanted to believe her, but the revelation of such an elaborate deception had shaken his trust. We'll see, was all he could offer for now. What none of them realized was that the true test of that connection, and of Miles's commitment to a world not his own, would come sooner than any of them anticipated. For even as they prepared to face the Void Collective, another threat was emerging from within the Celestian Empire itself, one that would force Miles to choose between his duty and his heart. The following days were a blur of activity. Miles immersed himself in the data about the Void Collective, studying their attack patterns, communication frequencies, and the limited visual recordings of their vessels. They appeared to be crystalline structures, not unlike Celestian architecture, but darker, absorbing light rather than refracting it. Most disturbing were the reports from the fallen colony worlds. The Void Collective didn't simply conquer, they transformed. Celestian survivors described a process whereby the very environment was altered, crystal structures darkening and reconfiguring to create what one report called shadow reflections of the original settlements. It's like they're creating a negative image of our civilization, Miles observed during a strategy session with Aranaya, Talaran, and the other conspirators. Not destroying, but inverting. Precisely, Dr. Vex confirmed. And the psychological effect on our people is devastating. Imagine seeing your world, your home, transformed into its dark mirror. What about the population, casualties? Talaran's markings dimmed. Few confirm deaths, but many Celestians simply disappear. Those who remain often exhibit altered behavior patterns, their luminescent markings dimmed or darkened. Mind control? Miles suggested. Perhaps, Dr. Vex replied. Or a more fundamental transformation. We haven't been able to recover any affected individuals for study. The scope of the threat was becoming clear to Miles. This wasn't simply an invasion. It was an existential challenge to Celestian civilization itself, and Earth would inevitably be next if the collective succeeded here. Despite the urgency of the situation, tensions remained between Miles and Aranaya. The revelation of her deception had created a barrier that neither seemed able to breach. They worked together efficiently, professionally, but the warming connection they had shared was now muted, held in check by caution and hurt. On the third night, after the revelation, Miles was working late in the laboratory they had converted into a command center when Aranaya entered alone. She wore simpler robes than usual, her royal status momentarily set aside. "You should rest," she said, observing the fatigue evident in his posture. "Even humans have limits." "I'm fine," Miles replied, not looking up from the communication frequency analysis he was studying. "These patterns are starting to make sense. I think with more time." "Miles," the gentle firmness in her voice made him look up. "Please, we need to talk about what happened." He set aside the data crystal, knowing she was right. This unresolved tension wasn't helping either of them. "I'm listening." Aranaya moved closer, her galaxy eyes reflecting the soft laboratory lighting. "I want you to understand why we did what we did. Not to excuse it, but to explain." "You didn't trust me," Miles said simply. "You needed to test me before revealing the truth." "It wasn't about trust. Not in the way you think," she sighed. A very human gesture she must have learned from observing him. "When the first void ships appeared, we sent our best diplomatic team to establish contact. They never returned. The second team came back, changed, their minds no longer their own. You were afraid the same would happen to me. We needed to be certain you could resist whatever influence they exert." Her markings pulsed with what might have been regret. "The methods we chose were manipulative. Yes. But the threat is very real." Miles was silent for a moment, processing her words. "And the connection between us? Was that part of the test too?" Aranaya's markings flashed with intensity. "No. That was unexpected. Unplanned." She moved even closer, close enough that he could feel the subtle energy field that surrounded all Celestians. "Unprecedented. As I said before." "Unprecedented can be dangerous," Miles observed, though he didn't move away. "So can the familiar, when it stops us from evolving." Her hand reached out, hesitating just short of touching his face. "My people have always believed ourselves separate, superior, above the need for connection with other species. I'm beginning to think that isolation may be our greatest weakness." The moment hung between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Miles knew that whatever happened next would fundamentally change his relationship with Aranaya, with Celestia itself. Duty and personal feelings had become hopelessly entangled. Before he could decide how to respond, an alarm shattered the moment, a piercing, crystalline tone that resonated through the entire palace. "Perimeter breach," Aranaya said, instantly alert. "The palace is under attack." They rushed to the command center, where Talaran and Captain Zyrex were already coordinating the defense. The holographic displays showed multiple intrusion points around the palace grounds. "Who is it?" Miles demanded. "The Void Collective?" "No," Zyrex replied grimly. "Internal insurgents, lower-tier extremists, using the confusion of recent events as cover for an uprising." Miles turned to Aranaya. "Lyrex?" Her markings pulsed with uncertainty. "Unknown, but the attack pattern suggests familiarity with palace security systems. They've disabled the outer perimeter defenses, Talaran reported. And they're using modified butterfly devices as offensive weapons. The technologies I showed you in my workshop, came a voice from the doorway. Lyrics stood there, flanked by palace guards. Though not by my choice. Explain, Aranaya demanded, her royal authority fully present despite the crisis. The lower-tier coalition has been infiltrated by extremists, Lyric said, approaching the command console. They stole my prototype designs months ago. I came to warn you as soon as I realized they were planning an attack. Why should we believe you? Talaran challenged. Because I'm still loyal to the promise of reform, not violent revolution. Lyric's partial markings pulsed earnestly. And because I can help you stop them. Another alarm sounded, more urgent, more personal. They've breached the inner palace, Zyrex announced. Heading for the royal quarters. The Emperor, Aranaya realized with horror. Father is defenseless. I'll go, Miles decided instantly. I know the layout, and they won't expect a human defender. Not alone, Aranaya countered. I'm coming with you. Your Highness, Zyrex protested. The risk is one I must take. He is my father. Her tone brooked no argument. Captain Zyrex, coordinate the palace defense. Talaran, secure the command center and communication systems. Lyrix, if you truly wish to help, give them everything you know about the insurgents' capabilities. Before anyone could object further, Aranaya was moving toward the exit, and Miles had no choice but to follow. They navigated the palace corridors at a run, passing groups of guards rushing to defensive positions. The sound of energy weapons discharging echoed from distant sections of the palace. The fastest route to Father's chambers is through the Crystal Garden Nexus, Aranaya said as they ran. But that's likely to be exposed. Then we take the maintenance shafts, Miles decided. Same ones we used before. They diverted to a service entrance, slipping into the narrow passages that ran between the palace walls. These utilitarian corridors lacked the ornate beauty of the main halls, but offered a direct path to the Emperor's private wing. As they moved through the dimly lit passages, Miles noticed Aranaya's markings were pulsing rapidly, betraying her anxiety. We'll reach him in time, he assured her. It's not just that, she replied, her voice tight. If these are truly lower-tier insurgents, then my reforms have come too late. The divisions in our society have already reached the breaking point. Or someone is manipulating those divisions, Miles suggested, creating chaos before the Void Collective arrives. Aranaya glanced at him sharply. You think the two are connected? It would be an effective strategy. Weaken your enemy from within before the external attack. Before she could respond, they reached the exit point nearest the Emperor's chambers. Miles peered through a small viewport, checking for threats. The corridor beyond appeared empty, but the sounds of conflict were closer now. Stay behind me, he instructed, drawing his pulse pistol. And be ready to run if necessary. They emerged into the ornate hallway, leading to the Emperor's private wing. The usual guards were absent, likely drawn away by the fighting elsewhere. Miles moved forward cautiously, senses alert for any sign of danger. They were halfway to the Emperor's chambers when Miles spotted them. 3 figures in plain gray coverings, their faces concealed, placing small devices at regular intervals along the corridor walls. Explosive charges, Miles whispered, pulling Aranaya into an alcove. They're rigging the entire wing. We need to stop them before they reach Father, Aranaya said, her voice resolute. Miles assessed the situation quickly. 3 opponents, armed with what appeared to be modified energy weapons. The corridor offered little cover, and they were outnumbered. I'll create a diversion, he decided. When they're distracted, you make for your father's chambers and secure him. And leave you to face them alone. No. This isn't a negotiation, Your Highness. Miles checked his weapon. Your father's safety is the priority. Before she could protest further, Miles stepped into the corridor and fired 2 precise shots, not at the insurgents, but at the ceiling above them. Crystal shards rained down, creating momentary confusion. He used the distraction to charge forward, diving behind a decorative column as return fire lanced toward him. "Go!" he shouted to Aranaya. "Now!" She hesitated only briefly, before rushing along the side of the corridor toward her father's chambers. One of the insurgents noticed and turned to fire at her. But Miles was faster, his pulse pistol hitting the attacker squarely in the shoulder and sending them sprawling. The remaining two focused their attention on Miles, their energy weapons carving chunks from the crystal column that sheltered him. He waited for a brief pause in their fire, then rolled to a new position, squeezing off another shot that missed, but forced them to take cover. The firefight continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. Miles managed to wound another attacker, but the third was more skilled, keeping him pinned down with relentless fire while moving steadily closer. Just as the insurgent was about to flank his position, a new energy beam lanced from further down the corridor, striking the attacker from behind. Captain Zyrex appeared with a squad of royal guards, their coordinated fire quickly overwhelming the remaining resistance. "Secure the prisoners," Zyrex ordered his men, "and disarm those explosive devices immediately." Miles emerged from cover, his uniform scorched in several places but otherwise unharmed. The princess went to her father's chambers. "Then we should join her," Zyrex replied, his tone suggesting it wasn't a request. They found Aranaya in the Emperor's private rooms, kneeling beside the bed where the once mighty ruler of Celestia now lay. The Emperor's blue skin had faded to an ashen gray, his luminescent markings barely visible. He appeared ancient and fragile, nothing like the imposing figure depicted in official images. "Father is safe," Aranaya said without looking up. "Though he doesn't recognize me." Miles hung back respectfully, while Zyrex approached the royal pair. "The attack has been contained, Your Highness." The insurgents were a small group, targeting key systems rather than mounting a full assault. "A diversion," Miles suggested, "or a test of our defenses. Either way, it reveals vulnerabilities we must address before the Void Collective arrives." Zyrex acknowledged. Aranaya finally rose from her father's bedside. "Have the prisoners been identified?" "Not yet, but preliminary examination suggests they are indeed lower-tier citizens, as we suspected." "I want to interrogate them personally," she said, her voice hard. "I need to understand what drove them to this." As they left the Emperor's chambers, Miles fell into step beside Aranaya. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted, her markings dim with emotion. "My father doesn't know me. My people are turning against each other, and an alien force threatens to transform our entire civilization into its dark reflection. All right is not a state I expect to experience anytime soon." Despite everything, Miles felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. "Then, we take it one challenge at a time. First, we secure the palace. Then, we prepare for the Void Collective. And find out who is really behind tonight's attack," she added. "I don't believe this was simply a lower-tier uprising. Someone orchestrated it. Someone with access and knowledge." The questions multiplied. The threats compounded. But as they walked together through the damaged corridor, Miles realized something had changed between them. The barrier that had formed after his discovery of their deception had begun to crumble, replaced by a new understanding forged in crisis. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced from within the palace or beyond the stars, they would face them together. The human guard and the alien princess, bound by duty, danger, and something deeper, neither was ready to name. The aftermath of the attack brought a new level of tension to the palace. The captured insurgents revealed little during interrogation, claiming to be freedom fighters for lower-tier rights. But, as Aranaya had suspected, evidence pointed to outside coordination. Someone with detailed knowledge of palace security had guided their assault. Meanwhile, Preparations for both the coronation and the Void Collective's arrival continued with increasing urgency. Miles spent most of his time studying the alien communication patterns, gradually developing an ability to recognize certain repeated sequences that might represent basic concepts. This one appears consistently when they encounter resistance, he explained to Aranaya and the scientific team. It could mean obstacle or enemy, or perhaps challenge. Dr. Vex nodded appreciatively. Remarkable progress, Captain. Your human neurological structure does indeed seem suited to interpreting these patterns. But understanding isolated concepts is a long way from meaningful communication, Miles cautioned. We need more data, more context, which we may not have time to gather, Talaran pointed out. Our latest scans show the Void Fleet has accelerated. They will reach Celestia just as the coronation concludes, in 3 days. The timing seemed too precise to be coincidental. They know about the coronation, Miles realized. They're timing their arrival to coincide with the transition of power. How could they know? Aranaya asked. The coronation date is significant in our astronomical calendar, but would be meaningless to an outside species. Unless they've been studying us for longer than we realized, Lyric suggested. He had been granted limited access to the command center, his expertise with lower-tier technology proving valuable. Or unless someone has been communicating with them. The implication hung heavy in the air. A traitor, not just working with internal insurgents, but with the Void Collective itself. We need to accelerate our preparations, Aranaya decided. Captain, you'll continue your work on communication. Talaran, coordinate our defensive fleet. Dr. Vex, I want all medical facilities prepared for potential casualties. And Captain Zyrex, double the palace guard and implement full security protocols for the coronation. As the others dispersed to their tasks, Miles remained with Aranaya. There's something else we should consider, he said, once they were alone. A contingency plan for your safety. My safety is not the priority, she replied firmly. My people are counting on your leadership, Miles interrupted. If something happens during the coronation, if the Void Collective somehow breaches our defenses, we need a secure location where you can continue to coordinate the response. Aranaya's markings pulsed with reluctance, but she nodded. What do you suggest? The Jade Gardens where we met your brother. They're centrally located but easily defensible, with multiple exit routes. We can establish a secondary command center there, shielded and secure. Make the arrangements, she agreed. But understand this, Miles, I will not abandon my people to save myself. If Celestia falls, I fall with it. The determination in her voice left no room for argument. Miles simply nodded, even as he privately resolved that such a sacrifice would not be necessary, not while he still drew breath. The day before the coronation, a final strategy session was held in the main command center. The atmosphere was tense as Aranaya, Miles, Talaran, and the other key figures reviewed their preparations. Our defensive fleet is positioned at these coordinates, Talaran explained, indicating points on the holographic display. Early warning systems have been enhanced, and all military personnel are on high alert. What about evacuation protocols for the civilian population? Aranaya asked. Captain Zyrex stepped forward. We've established safe zones in the lower caverns. If the attack comes during the coronation, we can move approximately 60% of the capital's population underground within 2 hours. Not good enough, Aranaya said firmly. I want that number at 80% minimum. Prioritize children and those with minimal markings, who would be most vulnerable. Yes, Your Highness. Miles studied the tactical display, noting potential weaknesses in the defensive formation. The southern approach has limited coverage, he observed. If I were commanding the Void Fleet, that's where I'd concentrate my forces. Talaran nodded. A valid concern. We'll reposition these 3 battle groups to reinforce that sector. As they continued refining the defense strategy, Miles noticed Dr. Vex standing apart from the others, studying a data tablet with unusual intensity. Something about the physician's demeanor triggered Miles's instincts, the same feeling he'd had when spotting the metallic butterfly at the welcome ceremony. "Doctor," Miles called, approaching casually. "Any progress with the medical preparations?" Vex looked up, his ancient features carefully composed. "Yes, Captain. All medical facilities are prepared for casualties. We've even adapted some protocols based on your insights regarding void technology." "Good to hear." Miles glanced at the tablet Vex was holding. "New data on the collective?" "Merely reviewing our existing information," Vex replied, subtly angling the screen away from Miles's view. "Nothing significant." Before Miles could press further, Aranaya called for his input on a communication strategy, and the moment passed. But his suspicion remained, a quiet alarm at the back of his mind. That evening, as final preparations for the coronation were underway, Miles sought out Lyrics in the workshop he'd been assigned within the palace. "Your security clearance has been increased," Miles noted, observing the new access panel Lyrics was working on. "Princess Aranaya values my technical expertise," Lyrics replied, his partial markings pulsing with what might have been pride. "Though many in the court still view me with suspicion. People fear what they don't understand, or what challenges their place in the hierarchy." Miles moved closer, watching Lyrics' skilled hands manipulate the crystal components. "You mentioned earlier that someone might be communicating with the Void Collective. What made you suggest that?" Lyrics' movements stilled momentarily. "The precision of their attacks, their knowledge of our defenses and vulnerabilities. It suggests inside information." "And who would have access to that level of information?" "Anyone in the Royal Council, the security forces, Dr. Vex and his medical team." Lyrics looked up, his galaxy eyes meeting Miles's directly. "Even Prince Talaran, who conveniently returned from the outer colonies just before the attacks escalated." "You suspect the prince?" "I suspect everyone, Captain." Lyrics resumed his work. "When you've lived as long as I have with half your markings missing, you learn not to trust too readily." Miles considered this. "How old are you, Lyrics?" 142 of your Earth years. Young for a Celestian, but old enough to have seen promises of reform come and go unfulfilled." His partial markings dimmed. "Princess Aranaya is different. She sees beyond the patterns on our skin. That's why I serve her, despite the risks." "What risks?" "The old families will not surrender their power easily, and if they can't prevent her coronation through conventional means." He left the implication hanging. Miles absorbed this, adding it to his growing map of palace politics and potential threats. "Keep your eyes open, Lyrics. If you notice anything unusual, especially regarding Dr. Vex, contact me immediately." As Miles turned to leave, Lyrics called after him. "Captain, the connection between you and the princess, it has not gone unnoticed." Miles paused, but didn't turn. "Is that relevant to our current crisis?" "Perhaps more than you realize. Traditions run deep in Celestian society. The idea of their ruler forming a bond with an off-worlder." Lyrics' voice softened. "It threatens some even more than her political reforms." With that troubling thought, Miles departed, making his way toward Aranaya's chambers for their final security briefing before the coronation. The palace was a flurry of activity, with decorations being placed and ceremonial guards practicing their formations. He found Aranaya on her private balcony, gazing up at the 3 moons that now hung perfectly aligned in the night sky, the celestial configuration that traditionally marked the coronation of a new ruler. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said without turning, somehow sensing his presence. "My ancestors believed the triple alignment represented past, present, and future coming into harmony. A perfect moment for transition of power." "It's impressive," Miles agreed, joining her at the railing. though I admit I'm more concerned with practical matters than celestial omens at the moment. Always the soldier. Her markings pulsed with gentle amusement. Even facing the beauty of alien skies, you think of strategy and defense. It's kept me alive so far. He hesitated, then added, and it's kept you alive too. Yes. She turned to face him fully, her galaxy eyes reflecting the moonlight. For which I remain grateful, despite our complicated beginnings. Miles realized this might be their last moment of privacy before events overtook them. Tomorrow's coronation, followed immediately by the Void Collective's arrival, would leave no time for personal matters. Arinaya, he began, uncertain how to express the thoughts that had been growing in his mind. Whatever happens tomorrow. Don't, she interrupted gently. No fatalistic predictions. We will face tomorrow's challenges when they come. Not before. That's not what I meant to say. Miles took a breath, deciding that directness was the only approach. I need you to know that my commitment to your safety, to Celestia's future, goes beyond my assigned duties now. It has become personal. Her luminescent patterns brightened with emotion. I know, Miles. I have felt it too. This connection between us that defies explanation or protocol. On Earth, we have a saying, the heart wants what it wants. It means emotions don't always follow logical paths or respect convenient boundaries. A wise observation for a species so young. She moved closer, the energy field that surrounded her tingling against his skin. Celestians have a similar concept. Pattern recognition transcends conscious thought. What we are drawn to, we recognize at a level deeper than reason. Miles reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched her face, the first time he had initiated such contact. Her skin was cooler than human temperature, with a subtle vibration beneath the surface, like touching a crystal that sang with contained energy. If we survive what's coming, he said softly, what happens to this? That, she replied, her own hand rising to cover his, will depend on whether Celestian society is truly ready for change, and on whether you're willing to belong to two worlds instead of one. Before Miles could respond, an urgent chime sounded, the communication device Arinaya carried for emergency alerts. The observatory has detected anomalies, she reported, after checking the message. Energy signatures matching void technology, but closer than their fleet should be. They've sent advanced scouts, Miles realized, or worse, infiltrators. The moment of connection broken, they quickly moved inside to the secure communication terminal. Talaran's face appeared on the crystal display, his markings pulsing rapidly with alarm. Sister, we've detected multiple small craft entering the atmosphere. They're using some kind of stealth technology that confounds our tracking systems. How many? Miles asked, leaning into the display's field of view. At least 12 that we can confirm. But there could be more. They're dispersing across the capital region. They're targeting the coronation, Arinaya said, her voice tight with certainty. Either to prevent it, or to maximize chaos during the ceremony. We should postpone, Talaran suggested. No. Arinaya's decision was immediate and firm. That's exactly what they want, to disrupt our transition of power, to show that they can dictate terms before they even arrive. The coronation proceeds as planned, but with enhanced security. I'll coordinate with Captain Zyrex, Miles said, already moving toward the door. We'll need to adjust the defensive perimeter and implement secondary verification protocols for all attendees. Miles, Arinaya's voice stopped him. Be careful. If these are void operatives, they may be able to influence Celestian minds. You could be the only one immune to their effects. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders as he nodded once and departed. The connection they had shared moments ago now seemed distant, overshadowed by the immediate threat. But it remained a driving force beneath his tactical considerations, a reason beyond duty to ensure tomorrow's events proceeded without catastrophe. Throughout the night, security forces scoured the capital for signs of the infiltrators. But the void craft had vanished from sensors as quickly as they had appeared. By dawn, tension had reached a breaking point, with rumors spreading among the palace staff and the general population. The coronation was scheduled for midday, when the three moons would be precisely aligned at their zenith. As the hour approached, dignitaries and nobles from across the Celestian Empire gathered in the Grand Crystal Hall, their ornate garments and brilliant markings creating a sea of light and color. Miles oversaw the final security arrangements personally, positioning guards at all key points and establishing a direct communication link with Talarin, who was coordinating the defensive fleet from the military command center. Dr. Vex had been tasked with monitoring for any signs of mental influence or unusual behavior among the attendees, while Lyric supervised the palace's technical systems from a secondary control room. When Aranaya appeared for the pre-coronation procession, Miles was momentarily stunned. She wore ceremonial robes unlike anything he had seen before, living crystal that seemed to flow around her like water, refracting light in impossible patterns. Her markings were enhanced with some kind of luminescent compound that made them shine with extraordinary brightness, emphasizing her royal lineage. "You look," he began, searching for an appropriate word. "Intimidating. I hope," she finished with a flash of humor in her galaxy eyes. "Today of all days, I must appear as the embodiment of Celestian power and tradition." "You've succeeded," Miles assured her, "though I prefer you without quite so much radiance." Her markings pulsed with what he now recognized as affection. "Soon enough, Captain. For now, let us focus on becoming Empress without incident." The ceremony began with ancient music played on crystal instruments, their tones resonating through the vast hall in complex harmonies. Miles remained near Aranaya, but not conspicuously so, his attention constantly scanning the crowd for any sign of threat. As the ritual progressed, the royal chamberlain recited the traditional oaths of succession, which Aranaya repeated in the formal Celestian language. The gathered nobility responded with their own pledges of fealty, their markings pulsing in synchronized patterns of loyalty. The climactic moment approached, the placing of the crystal crown upon Aranaya's head, officially transferring power from her father to her. The ancient artifact was brought forward on a hovering platform, its faceted surface catching and amplifying the light from the gathered Celestians. Just as the chamberlain lifted the crown, Miles noticed something alarming, a subtle darkening in the crystal nearest the ceiling, as if shadows were spreading through the transparent material. He glanced around quickly, noting with growing concern that none of the Celestians appeared to notice the change, his instincts screaming a warning. Miles moved swiftly toward Aranaya, hand moving to his concealed weapon. Before he could reach her, the darkened area of ceiling suddenly liquefied, dropping down into the ceremony like black mercury. "Void presence!" Miles shouted, drawing his pulse pistol and firing at the descending mass. "Evacuate the Empress!" Chaos erupted as the dark substance hit the floor and began to spread, touching several nearby Celestians, who immediately froze in place, their markings dimming. The royal guards responded quickly, forming a protective ring around Aranaya, but their movements seemed sluggish, uncoordinated. Miles fought his way through the panicking crowd, witnessing with horror as more Celestians came into contact with the spreading darkness and fell under its influence. Those affected didn't attack. They simply stood motionless, their galaxy eyes darkening to bottomless voids. "Don't let it touch you," he warned, reaching the protective circle around Aranaya. "It's affecting your mind somehow." Captain Zyrex, still unaffected, nodded grimly. "The emergency exit, now." They began moving Aranaya toward a concealed door behind the throne dais, Miles taking point with his weapon ready. The spreading darkness seemed to sense their intent, flowing more rapidly in their direction, enveloping everything in its path. "It's hurting us," Miles realized aloud. This isn't random, it's directing our movement. As if confirming his assessment, another pool of darkness appeared ahead of them, cutting off the route to the emergency exit. They were being corralled, pushed toward the center of the hall, where the crystal crown still hovered on its platform, untouched by the chaos around it. "The crown!" Aranaya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the panic. "They want the crown!" "Why?" Miles demanded, scanning for another escape route. "It's not just a symbol," she explained quickly. "It contains the accumulated knowledge of all previous rulers, including defense codes, strategic information, everything a hostile force would need to overcome our protections." Understanding dawned. This isn't an assassination attempt. It's an intelligence-gathering operation. "We can't let them have it," Zyrex declared, raising his energy weapon toward the crown itself. "Better destroyed than compromised." "No!" Aranaya's command stopped him. "Without the crown, the Empire loses millennia of knowledge. There must be another way." Miles made a split-second decision. "The Jade Gardens, our contingency location. We can reach it through the service corridors if we move now." Aranaya nodded, understanding his plan. "Captain Zyrex, create a diversion. Make it appear we're heading for the Western Security Station." As Zyrex led several guards in the opposite direction, drawing some of the darkness with them, Miles guided Aranaya and two remaining guards toward a small maintenance door partially hidden behind decorative crystal formations. They slipped through just as another wave of darkness flowed toward them, sealing the door behind them. The narrow corridor was dimly lit and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the ceremonial hall. Miles led the way, pulse pistol ready, his mind racing through options and contingencies. "The crown is still vulnerable," one of the guards pointed out. "We've only delayed its capture." "Not for long," Miles replied. "Talaran has been monitoring from the command center. Once he sees what's happening, he'll initiate the crown's security protocol." "Which is?" the guard asked. "Classified," Aranaya answered before Miles could respond. "But effective." They moved quickly through the service passages, encountering no resistance. The lack of pursuit troubled Miles. Either the Void presence couldn't track them through these areas, or it was concentrating on the crown and didn't consider their escape a priority. Neither option was particularly reassuring. When they finally reached the Jade Gardens, they found them eerily quiet, the crystalline plants chiming softly in the gentle air currents. The secondary command center had been established as planned, its systems ready for activation. "Secure the perimeter," Miles ordered the guards, "and establish communication with the defense fleet. We need to know what's happening outside the palace." As the guards moved to obey, Aranaya approached the central console, her expression grim. The coronation interrupted, the capital infiltrated, and the Void fleet still approaching. Not the most auspicious beginning to my reign. "The ceremony doesn't make you Empress," Miles reminded her. "Your leadership does. And right now, your people need that more than ever." She activated the command systems, holographic displays springing to life around them. The tactical situation was immediately apparent and dire. Multiple Void infiltration points had been detected across the capital, with reports of Celestians being converted by contact with the dark substance. "It's not just physical," Aranaya observed, studying the data. "The darkness changes them somehow. Those affected stop responding to normal communication and begin emitting the same electromagnetic patterns as the Void Collective." "They're being networked," Miles suggested. "Incorporated into some kind of hive mind or collective intelligence." Before they could discuss further, a new alert appeared, a priority communication from Talaran. Aranaya activated the channel immediately. "Sister!" Talaran's image appeared, his markings pulsing with urgency. "Are you secure?" "For the moment," she confirmed. "What's the situation with the crown?" "Protected. I initiated the security protocol as soon as the attack began. The crown has been atomically dispersed and can only be reconstituted with your biometric signature. Miles felt a moment of relief, but it was short-lived as Talaran continued. But that's not why I'm contacting you. Our long-range sensors have detected a massive energy surge from the approaching Void Fleet. They've accelerated dramatically. They'll reach Celestia within hours, not days. They know we've discovered their advanced team. Miles realized. They're abandoning subtlety for speed. Worse than that, Talaran added grimly. The energy signature suggests they're preparing some kind of large-scale weapon or device. Something we've never encountered before. Arinaya's markings dimmed with concern. Recommendations? Full military mobilization, evacuation of all civilian centers within the projected arrival zone, and... Talaran hesitated. Activation of the stellar shield. The last suggestion clearly shocked Arinaya. The shield has never been tested at full capacity. The energy requirements alone would drain our reserves for months. If the void weapon is what I fear, we may not have months to consider alternatives. Miles watched the exchange, noting the gravity in both siblings' expressions. What exactly is the stellar shield? Our last line of defense, Arinaya explained. A planetary energy field that theoretically could repel any external threat. But generating it requires channeling power from our sun through a network of amplification stations. The environmental impact could be severe. And without it? If the void weapon is designed to transform our world, as it did the colony planets. She didn't finish the thought, but her meaning was clear. After a moment of contemplation, she made her decision. Begin shield initialization, brother, but hold at 80% capacity until we confirm the nature of their weapon. In the meantime, I need to address our people, those not yet affected by the infiltration. They deserve to know what we face. The communication systems in the Garden Hub are limited, one of the guards noted. To reach the entire population, you would need the Empress's broadcast chamber, which is in the Central Palace, potentially compromised, Miles added with concern. There's another option, came a voice from the garden entrance. Lyrics stood there, looking harried but determined. The lower-tier communication network, less sophisticated than the royal systems, but with broader reach in some ways. Every home, every public space in the lower tiers has access. Can you establish a connection from here? Arinaya asked. Given a few minutes. Yes. Lyrics moved to the command console, his skilled hands already working on the crystal controls. But there's something else you should know. Dr. Vex is missing. Miles tensed. Since when? Just before the attack began. He was supposed to be monitoring for void influence, but never reported in. I checked the medical center. His private research materials are gone as well. The pieces clicked into place in Miles's mind. He's the one. The traitor working with the Void Collective. We can't be certain, Arinaya cautioned, though her markings suggested she shared his suspicion. The timing is too perfect, Miles insisted. His access to your biological samples would explain how they bypassed security using your signature. His medical knowledge would make him invaluable to an alien species, trying to understand Celestian physiology. And as Imperial physician, no one would question his movements or research, Lyrics added, still working on the communication system. Arinaya's galaxy eyes darkened with betrayal. Dr. Vex has served my family for generations. If he has turned against us, then we need to find him, Miles finished. He'll know the Void Collective's true plans, their weaknesses, everything we need to mount an effective defense. First things first, Arinaya decided. I address our people, then we hunt for Vex. She turned to Lyrics. Is the system ready? Almost, Your Highness. One final adjustment and... He stopped abruptly, his partial markings flaring with alarm. We have a problem. Something is interfering with the transmission frequencies. All of them. Miles moved to look over his shoulder at the display. The Void Collective? No. This is different, more focused. Lyrix's hands moved rapidly over the controls. It's coming from within the palace itself. Someone is deliberately jamming all outgoing communications. Can you bypass it? Not from here. I would need access to the main communication hub. Miles exchanged a look with Aranaya, both understanding the implications. Someone didn't want the Empress addressing her people. Someone working from inside the palace systems. We need to split up, Miles decided reluctantly. I'll take one guard and Lyrix to the communication hub. We'll clear the interference and establish a secure channel for your address. And I remain here with one guard, Aranaya concluded, not looking pleased with the arrangement. It's logical, but I dislike being sidelined while others take risks. You're not being sidelined, Your Highness. You're being preserved to lead once we've restored communications. Miles turned to the guards. Kyleth, you're with me and Lyrix. Marin, you stay and protect the Empress with your life. As they prepared to depart, Aranaya approached Miles privately. This feels like a trap, she said quietly. Dr. Vex missing. Communications jammed. Someone is isolating us deliberately. I know, Miles acknowledged. But sometimes the only way past a trap is through it. He hesitated, then added, if we don't return within 2 hours, use the emergency transport in the garden vault. Get to the secondary command bunker in the southern mountains. And abandon the capital, my people? Temporarily, until you can rally the unaffected population and the military. His eyes held hers intently. Promise me, Aranaya. After a moment, she nodded. 2 hours, not a minute more. As Miles turned to leave with Lyrix and the guard, Aranaya caught his arm. Without words, she pulled him closer and pressed her forehead to his, a Celestian gesture of deep connection and trust. Return to me, Miles Carter, she said softly. That is an Imperial command. Yes, Your Highness, he replied, allowing himself a brief smile before turning serious again. Lock down these gardens after we leave. Trust no one who comes, not even someone wearing my face. The void can create convincing illusions. With that final warning, Miles led his small team out of the Jade Gardens and back into the uncertain, dangerous corridors of a palace under alien infiltration. The fate of Celestia, and of the connection that had formed between a human soldier and an alien empress, hung in the balance of what would happen in the next few hours. The journey to the communication hub took them through increasingly hazardous territory. The palace's elegant corridors, once filled with light and the gentle movement of Celestian courtiers, were now eerily empty in some sections and scenes of frozen tableau in others. Celestians, caught by the void, influence stood motionless. Their markings darkened. Their galaxy eyes turned to empty voids. Don't touch them, Miles warned, as they carefully navigated around a group of affected nobles. We don't know if the conversion is contagious through physical contact. It isn't, Lyrix said with surprising certainty. At least, not in the way you mean. The darkness must make direct contact with a Celestian's energy field to convert them. But once converted, they become relays of some kind, extending the void's influence. How do you know this? Miles asked sharply. Lyrix's partial markings pulsed with what might have been shame. Because I helped Dr. Vex study a sample of the substance, before I realized what he was really doing with the research. Miles stopped short, signaling for the guard to cover them. You worked with Vex? When were you planning to share this information? I didn't know he was a traitor then, Lyrix defended. He claimed it was a new type of medical nanite, designed to repair damaged marking patterns. A potential treatment for lower tiers like me. He gestured to the blank side of his face. He offered hope, Captain. Something rare for my kind. What did you discover about the substance? It's semi-organic, particularly with our natural electromagnetic communication abilities. The markings, Miles realized. They're not just decorative or social indicators. They're communication organs. Exactly. They allow Celestians to share emotional states, basic concepts, a limited form of telepathy. The void substance hijacks that system, connecting the affected Celestian to their network instead of ours. This information added a new dimension to Miles's understanding of the threat. Can it be reversed, the conversion? Theoretically, if the connection could be severed before complete integration occurs. But I don't know how long that window lasts. They resumed moving, more cautiously now. As they approached the Central Palace section, they encountered increasing signs of struggle, scorch marks from energy weapons, shattered crystal formations, abandoned security posts. The hub is just ahead, the guard, Kyleth, reported. But the main entrance would be too exposed. Maintenance access? Miles suggested, looking to Lyrics. This way. The technician led them to a service panel that opened into a narrow passage. This will bring us out near the secondary controls. The maintenance shaft was cramped even for Miles's human frame. For the taller Celestians, it required uncomfortable contortion. They moved as quietly as possible, listening for any sound that might indicate void presence or converted Celestians. When they finally emerged into the communication hub, the scene confirmed Miles's worst suspicions. The vast chamber, filled with crystal technology that regulated all palace transmissions, showed signs of deliberate sabotage. Several control panels had been physically destroyed, and a dark, oily substance had been applied to key junction points. Void technology, Lyrics confirmed, examining the damage. It's not just jamming our signals, it's corrupting the entire communication network. Can you clear it? Miles asked, securing the room while Kyleth guarded the main entrance. Not entirely, not quickly, but I might be able to establish a limited channel, enough for the Empress's address. Lyrics moved to a secondary console that appeared less damaged. I'll need time. How much? 20 minutes, minimum. And that's assuming the void influence doesn't adapt to my countermeasures. Miles nodded. Do it. We'll keep you safe. As Lyrics worked, Miles examined the hub more thoroughly, looking for clues about who had caused the damage. Near one of the destroyed panels, he found what he was looking for, a small medical injector of distinctly Celestian design, the kind Dr. Vex always carried. He was here, Miles confirmed, showing the item to Kyleth. Recently, the guard's markings pulsed with anger. The betrayal of an Imperial physician is unprecedented. The penalty would be— Let's focus on finding him first, Miles interrupted. Punishment comes after we understand his motives, and what exactly he told the Void Collective. Captain, Lyrics called suddenly, his voice tight with alarm. I'm detecting an energy buildup in the palace power systems. Massive fluctuations, well beyond normal parameters. Miles joined him at the console, studying the readings. What could cause this? Only one thing I know of, the crystal engine being activated at full capacity. The what? Lyrics's partial markings pulsed rapidly. It's an experimental power source in the palace foundations, designed to channel and amplify energy from our sun, similar to the stellar shield but localized. Dr. Vex was on the research team, but the project was suspended as too dangerous. And now he's activated it, Miles concluded. Why? What does it do? Theoretically, it could transform the entire palace into a massive energy transmitter, or receiver. Lyrics looked up, his galaxy eyes wide with realization. He's creating a beacon for the Void Fleet, a target designator for their weapon. Miles's military training kicked in immediately. How do we shut it down? The control room is 5 levels below us, in the ancient foundations. But if the engine has already begun its activation sequence, then we move fast. Miles turned to Kyleth. Can you complete the communication repairs while we deal with the engine? The guard hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to protect them and his technical abilities. I have basic training in crystal systems, but nothing like Lyrix's expertise. It will have to do, Miles decided. Lyrix, give him the quickest possible instructions. Then, you're coming with me to the engine room. After a hurried tutorial, they left Kylith to continue the communication repairs, while Miles and Lyrix descended into the palace depths. The ancient access ways became increasingly primitive as they moved downward, the perfect crystal of the upper palace giving way to rougher, more natural formations. How much farther? Miles asked, as they navigated a narrow passage where the crystal walls pulsed with their own inner light. 2 more levels, Lyrix replied. But we should be careful. The energy readings suggest the activation is accelerating. The radiation could be dangerous even before we reach the engine room. As if confirming his warning, the crystal around them began to vibrate subtly, emitting a high-pitched tone at the edge of Miles's hearing. The light pulsing through the walls intensified, creating disorienting patterns. "What's happening?" Miles demanded, steadying himself against a wall. The crystal matrix is resonating with the engine's energy field. It's spreading throughout the palace foundation. Lyrix's expression grew grave. If it reaches critical harmonization, the entire structure could become a conduit for the void weapon. Affecting what, the palace itself? The entire capital city, possibly beyond. The stakes, suddenly clear. Miles pushed forward with renewed urgency. They descended through increasingly unstable passageways, the crystal now humming audibly, fragments occasionally breaking off from the vibration. When they finally reached the engine level, a wave of heat and energy hit them like a physical force. The corridor ahead glowed with intense light, pulsing in patterns that made Miles's eyes water. "The radiation will be stronger inside," Lyrix warned. "Celestians have some natural resistance, but for a human—" "I'll risk it," Miles said firmly. "We don't have a choice." The engine room itself was a vast spherical chamber. Its walls formed of raw crystal that seemed to have grown naturally into this perfect shape. At its center hovered what appeared to be a miniature sun, a sphere of blindingly bright energy contained within a complex geometric framework of dark crystal. And standing at the control console, manipulating the energy flow, was Dr. Vex. The ancient physician didn't look up as they entered, his attention fixed on the controls before him. "Right on schedule, Captain Carter," he said calmly. "I calculated an 87% probability you would discover the sabotage and trace it here." "Step away from the console, Doctor," Miles ordered, raising his pulse pistol. "That weapon is useless against me now." Vex finally turned, and Miles saw with horror that the doctor's form was partially transformed, his blue skin marbled with darkness, his markings pulsing with unnatural patterns. "I am becoming something greater than Celestian, as is our entire species." "You've been corrupted by the void," Lyrix said, his voice a mixture of disgust and pity. "This isn't evolution, Vex. It's assimilation." "You of all people should understand." "Lyrix," Vex replied. "You, who have lived as less than complete in our society. The Void Collective offers unity, equality. No more hierarchies based on marking patterns. No more stratification." "At the cost of free will," Miles countered. "Of individuality." "Acceptable losses for true advancement." Vex gestured to the pulsing energy sphere. "This engine will amplify the collective's transformation signal 1,000-fold. The entire capital will evolve simultaneously, including your precious Empress." Miles kept his weapon trained on Vex while assessing the engine controls. "How do we shut it down, Lyrix?" "The primary regulators," Lyrix replied, pointing to a series of crystal rods inserted into the console. "Remove them in sequence and the reaction should destabilize safely." "Should?" Miles questioned. "Unless he's modified the failsafes," Lyrix admitted. Vex's partially transformed face showed a cold smile. "Clever. As always. Yes, I've reconfigured the system. Remove those regulators now, and the energy releases all at once. The palace, the city, everything for 50 miles, becomes a crater. You're bluffing, Miles challenged, though he feared the doctor wasn't. Am I? Test your theory, Captain. But know that even if you somehow stop this engine, the Void Fleet arrives within the hour. Their weapon is already primed. This, he gestured around them, is merely preparation, making Celestia ready for its evolution. Miles's mind raced through options. None of them good. If Vex was telling the truth, they couldn't simply shut down the engine without potentially causing a catastrophic explosion. But leaving it running meant the entire capital would be transformed when the Void weapon activated. There must be another way to disrupt the process, he said to Lyrics, not taking his eyes off Vex. Something that wouldn't trigger a complete meltdown. Lyrics studied the engine configuration, his partial markings pulsing with concentration. Perhaps, if we could reverse the polarity of the containment field, it might cancel out the amplification effect without releasing the stored energy. Don't be foolish, Vex scoffed. The calibration is too precise. You'd never... His words cut off as Miles fired his pulse pistol. Not at Vex, but at the ceiling above him. Crystal shards rained down, forcing the doctor away from the console. In that moment of distraction, Lyrics lunged forward, his hands moving with extraordinary speed across the controls. "Stop him!" Vex shouted, and Miles realized with horror that the doctor wasn't alone. From alcoves around the chamber emerged several Celestian guards, their forms already partially transformed by Void influence, their weapons raised. Miles fired again, this time at the approaching guards, forcing them to take cover. "Hurry, Lyrics!" Almost. There. Lyrics' hands blurred over the crystal controls, making adjustments too rapid for Miles to follow. The field is destabilizing, but I need to balance the energy flow or... A blast from one of the corrupted guards struck Lyrics in the shoulder, spinning him away from the console. Miles returned fire, dropping the guard, then rushed to Lyrics' side. "I'm all right," the technician gasped, his partial markings flickering with pain. "But the process, it's only partially reversed. The engine is in flux." Indeed. The energy sphere at the center of the chamber was fluctuating wildly now, expanding and contracting, its color shifting from brilliant white to a darker, pulsing crimson. Dr. Vex had recovered and returned to the console, his hands moving frantically over the controls. "What have you done?" he demanded, real fear showing through his transformed features. "The harmonic resonance is collapsing." "Good," Lyrics managed a pained smile. "It won't amplify the Void signal now. It might even disrupt it." "Fool! It will tear the palace apart before..." The doctor's words were drowned out by a deafening crystalline tone as the engine's energy sphere suddenly contracted to a pinpoint, then expanded in a blinding flash. Miles threw himself over Lyrics, expecting an explosion, but instead felt a strange wave of energy pass through him, neither heat nor pressure, but something more fundamental, as if reality itself rippled momentarily. When he looked up, the engine sphere had stabilized into a pulsing blue-white light, significantly dimmer than before. The corrupted guards lay motionless on the floor, and Dr. Vex stood frozen at the console, his partially transformed body now completely still, as if turned to stone. "What happened?" Miles asked, helping Lyrics to his feet. "The energy field inverted," Lyrics explained, wincing as he held his injured shoulder. "Instead of amplifying the Void influence, it created a counter-frequency, a cancellation wave. Will it affect the Void weapon when it arrives? I don't know. Maybe. But more importantly, it seems to have neutralized the Void influence within the palace, at least temporarily." He gestured to the frozen guards in Vex. "They're in stasis. The connection to the collective has been severed. but they haven't returned to normal either. Miles approached Vex cautiously, confirming the doctor was indeed completely immobilized. Can they be restored? Perhaps, with time and research. But right now, we have more immediate concerns. Larix moved back to the engine controls, examining the readings. The counter frequency is stable, but weakening. When the Void Fleet arrives with their main weapon, we need to warn Aranaya, Miles decided, and hope Kylith succeeded in restoring communications. They made their way back up through the palace levels as quickly as Lyrix's injury allowed. The vibration in the crystal walls had ceased, and the oppressive energy field had dissipated. More encouragingly, they encountered several Celestians who had been affected by the void influence now recovering, their markings gradually returning to normal luminescence. When they reached the communication hub, they found Kylith defending the entrance against what appeared to be the last of the corrupted palace guards. With Miles's help, they neutralized the threat and secured the area. The communication system is partially restored, Kylith reported. Limited range, but enough to reach the Jade Gardens and the military command center. Excellent work, Miles commended him, then immediately established contact with the Gardens. Aranaya, do you read me? After a tense moment, her voice came through the crystal communicator, clear with relief. Miles, we thought you might be lost. What happened? The darkness retreated suddenly, and those affected in the Gardens began to recover. Miles quickly explained about the engine and the counter-frequency effect. It's buying us time, but Lyrix doesn't think it will hold against the Void Fleet's main weapon. Talaran reports they've entered the outer atmosphere, Aranaya replied grimly. The stellar shield is initializing, but it won't reach full capacity before they're in range. Then we need a new strategy, Miles thought quickly. The engine's counter-frequency worked on the corrupted Celestians in the palace. If we could amplify it through the shield system instead of just the palace matrix. A planetary counterwave. Lyrix finished the thought, his partial markings brightening with excitement despite his injury. It could neutralize their weapon entirely. Can it be done? Aranaya asked. Theoretically. But we would need to transmit the exact frequency pattern to all shield generators simultaneously. And someone would need to remain at the engine to maintain the source signal. Miles made a decision. Lyrix, get to the military command center. Work with Talaran to interface the engine's frequency with the shield system. Kylith and I will hold the engine room and ensure the signal remains stable. It's too dangerous, Aranaya objected. The engine room will be the Void's primary target once they realize what we're doing. Which is why I need to be there, Miles insisted. The Void influence affects Celestians first and most strongly. I'm the logical choice to defend the engine. There was a moment of silence before Aranaya spoke again, her voice carrying the full weight of Imperial authority. Very well, Captain, but I will not remain hidden in the Gardens while others risk everything. I'm joining Talaran at the command center to coordinate our defense. Miles knew better than to argue with that tone. Understood, Your Highness. Be careful. You as well, Miles. Her voice softened slightly. Remember your promise to return. The communication ended, and Miles turned to Lyrix and Kylith. Let's move. We don't have much time. As they prepared to separate, Lyrix gripped Miles's arm with surprising strength. Captain, what you're planning, holding the engine room against a void assault. It's likely a one-way mission. I know, Miles replied simply. Then you should also know this. The life debt token the princess gave you. It's more than a symbol of trust. It contains a quantum entanglement with her own life force. If your life is in true peril, it will draw energy from her to sustain you. His galaxy eyes held Miles intently. But the exchange goes both ways. If she is threatened, you may feel it through the token, and you may be able to help her, even at a distance. Miles touched the blue jade box he still carried. Why tell me this now? Because I believe you'll need it before this day ends. Lyrix's partial markings pulsed with solemn certainty. And because what exists between you and the Empress, it transcends our understanding. Such connections are rare, even among Celestians. Between different species, it is unprecedented. With those cryptic words, they parted, Lyrix heading for the military command center, while Miles and Kyleth returned to the treacherous depths of the palace and the engine that had become both their greatest danger and their only hope. The descent back to the engine room was quicker this time, as they knew the route and the most immediate dangers had been neutralized by the counter-frequency. Still, Miles moved cautiously, aware that the temporary reprieve could end at any moment if the Void Fleet managed to overcome the effect. When they reached the engine chamber, they found it unchanged, the energy sphere pulsing steadily with blue-white light. Dr. Vex and the corrupted guards still frozen in their strange stasis. Miles approached the control console, studying the unfamiliar Celestian interface. "Can you monitor these readings?" he asked Kyleth. "Alert me to any significant changes." The guard nodded, moving to a secondary console. "The frequency appears stable for now, but these energy levels, they're gradually declining. How long until they're too weak to maintain the counter effect?" "At current depletion rates." Kyleth's markings pulsed as he calculated. "Perhaps 30 minutes. Less if there's external interference." Miles checked his weapon and surveyed the chamber for defensive positions. "Then we hold for 30 minutes, or until Lyrix and Talaran can integrate this frequency with the stellar shield." They didn't have to wait long for the first challenge. Less than 10 minutes later, a deep vibration rumbled through the foundation, and the crystal walls began to emit a discordant tone. "They're here," Kyleth said unnecessarily, his markings pulsing with tension. "The Void Fleet has entered weapons range." The communicator Miles carried activated with Arania's voice. "Miles, do you read me? The Void ships have deployed some kind of energy projection device. They're focusing it on the palace." "We feel it," Miles confirmed. "The engine room is vibrating. Status on the shield integration?" "Lyrix and Talaran are making progress, but it's complex work. The shield is at 70% capacity, but without the counter-frequency, it won't stop their transformation weapon." "How much longer do they need?" 15 minutes, minimum." Miles exchanged glances with Kyleth. "The engine's output is dropping. We might not have 15 minutes. "Then we must buy more time," Arania said firmly. "I'm authorizing emergency power rerouting to your location. It will weaken our other defenses. But if it keeps the counter-frequency active—" "Do it," Miles agreed. "We'll hold here as long as possible." The communication ended as another, stronger vibration shook the chamber. Cracks began to appear in the crystal walls, and the frozen forms of Dr. Vex and the corrupted guards started to show signs of movement, slight but perceptible twitches, as if something was fighting to reactivate them. "They're targeting the specific frequency," Kyleth realized, monitoring the console, attempting to disrupt it with an opposing wave. "Can we adjust to compensate?" "I can try, but my knowledge of the system is limited." The guard's hands moved over the controls, making cautious adjustments. That might stabilize it temporarily." The energy sphere responded, its color shifting slightly toward a deeper blue, the pulsations becoming more rapid. The movement of the frozen figures slowed again, but Miles could see the strain in the system, crystal components beginning to fracture under the opposing forces. Another communication came through, this time from Lyrix. "Captain, we've identified the integration pathway for the counter-frequency. But there's a problem. We need to boost the signal strength beyond what the engine can currently provide. We need a surge." "How do we generate that?" Miles asked. "There's an emergency protocol, a controlled overload of the containment field. It would create a momentary power spike, enough to fully pattern the shield with the counter-frequency." "And after that momentary spike?" Lyrix hesitated. "The engine would likely destabilize completely. Anyone in the chamber would be exposed to lethal levels of energy. Miles understood the implication immediately. How do I initiate this protocol? Miles, no. Aranaya's voice cut in, apparently monitoring the same channel. We'll find another way. There is no other way, is there? Lyrics, Miles pressed. The technician's response was reluctant. No, not in the time we have. Miles made his decision. Kyleth, evacuate the chamber. Get to a safe distance. The guard's markings pulsed with conflict. My duty is to protect you, Captain. Your duty is to the Empress and Celestia. You can't help me with this. But you can help them by reporting what happens here. When Kyleth still hesitated, Miles added, That's an order. Guard, go. Finally, Kyleth nodded and moved toward the exit. It has been an honor, Captain Carter. Likewise. Miles turned his attention back to the communicator. Lyrics, talk me through the procedure. Miles, please. Aranaya's voice was tight with emotion. There must be another solution. Your Highness, Miles replied formally, though his heart was anything but detached. We both know sometimes leadership requires sacrifice. This is my choice. After a moment of silence, she responded with equal formality, though he could hear the strain beneath it. Proceed, Captain. Celestia will remember your service. Lyrics then guided Miles through the complex sequence of adjustments needed to prepare the engine for the controlled overload. The process was delicate and precise, requiring modifications to multiple crystal regulators while maintaining the counter-frequency stability. As Miles worked, the chamber around him continued to deteriorate. Larger cracks spread through the walls, and the frozen figures of Vex and the guards began to move more noticeably. The Void influence fighting against its containment. The Void Fleet is concentrating its weapon on your location, Talaran reported through the communicator. They've identified the source of the counter-frequency. The palace structure is beginning to transform despite the protection. How much longer until the shield is ready? Miles asked, his hands steady despite the increasing danger. Generators at 93% alignment, Lyrics replied. 2 more minutes until we can receive the surge. Miles glanced at Dr. Vex, whose formerly frozen form was now moving with growing coordination. Darkness spreading further across his features. We might not have 2 minutes. He completed the final adjustments to the engine controls, preparing for the surge protocol. As he did, the blue jade token Aranaya had given him began to pulse warmly against his chest, as if responding to his proximity to the energy sphere. Miles, Aranaya's voice came through again, softer now. The life debt token. Lyrics told me, he interrupted gently. It's all right, Aranaya. This is my choice. It doesn't have to be. The token can protect you, channel the energy, and drain your life force in the process? No, Celestia needs its Empress. Miles positioned his hand over the final activation crystal. Shield status? 98%, Talaran reported. Ready to receive on your mark. Miles took a deep breath, looking around the ancient chamber one last time. Despite the danger, despite knowing what came next, he felt a strange peace. In this alien world, so far from Earth, he had found purpose and something more precious than he had ever expected. Initiating surge in 3, 2, 1. Just as his hand touched the activation crystal, several things happened simultaneously. Dr. Vex broke free from his stasis with a roar of rage, lunging toward Miles. The blue jade token at Miles's chest burst into brilliant light, creating a field of energy around him. And through the communicator came Aranaya's voice, not speaking, but singing, a haunting, crystalline melody that seemed to resonate with both the token and the engine itself. The energy sphere expanded rapidly, its color shifting to a deep, vibrant indigo that matched Aranaya's skin. The surge wave propagated outward, passing through Miles without harm as the token's field absorbed and redirected the energy. Dr. Vex, caught without such protection, screamed as the wave engulfed him, not in pain, but in what sounded like release. The entire chamber filled with blinding light, forcing Miles to shield his eyes. The crystal walls resonated with Aranaya's song, amplifying it, joining it, until it seemed the entire palace was singing. Through the communicator came Talleyrand's voice, nearly lost in the crescendo of energy. Counter-frequency received. Shield deploying at full capacity. The light peaked, impossibly bright, then gradually faded. When Miles could see again, the engine sphere had stabilized at a fraction of its former size, pulsing gently with a soft blue glow. Dr. Vex lay on the floor, his form no longer corrupted by darkness, his markings restored to normal though dim with exhaustion. And the token at Miles's chest had changed. What had been a small blue jade box was now a crystalline star, its points extending outward like a compass rose, each one pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Miles," Aranaya's voice came through the communicator, weak but clear. "Are you there?" "I'm here," he confirmed, still stunned by what had happened. "I'm alive." "How?" "The life debt bond. When activated fully, it creates a connection that can transcend physical limitations." She sounded drained, but relieved. "I couldn't let you sacrifice yourself. Not when there was another way." Before Miles could respond, Talleyrand's voice cut in with urgency. "The shield is fully deployed and carrying the counter-frequency. The Void Fleet, they're being affected. Their ships are changing, reverting to some kind of crystalline state." "The transformation works both ways," came Lyrix's voice, filled with wonder. "Their own weapon, reflected back at them through our counter-frequency." "Status of the capital," Aranaya demanded, strength returning to her voice. "The darkness is receding everywhere," Talleyrand reported. "Those affected are beginning to recover. The palace structure is restabilizing." Miles sank to his knees, the adrenaline that had sustained him finally ebbing. The transformed token continued to pulse against his chest, a tangible reminder of the connection that had saved him, and perhaps all of Celestia. "Captain Carter," Talleyrand addressed him formally, "I believe you have fulfilled your duty as Royal Guard most admirably. The Empress awaits your report in the command center." "The Empress?" Miles questioned. "Yes," Aranaya confirmed, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "It seems that despite the interruption, the coronation has been completed in spirit, if not in ceremony. The Crystal Crown has reconstituted itself and accepted my claim." Miles managed to stand, looking at the now docile engine that had nearly claimed his life. "I'll be there as soon as possible, Your Majesty." "Not as my guard, Miles," she replied softly, "but as something more, something unprecedented." As Miles made his way out of the ancient chamber, leaving the unconscious but recovering Dr. Vex to the medical team that had finally arrived, he felt the weight of what had happened and what was still to come. The crisis might be ending, but the true challenge was just beginning, defining what would exist between a human soldier and a Celestian Empress in a universe where such connections had never before been imagined. The days following the Void Collective's defeat were filled with both celebration and solemn recovery. Throughout the capital, Celestians who had been affected by the dark influence gradually returned to normal, though many reported troubling dreams and fragmented memories of their time under alien control. The official coronation ceremony was rescheduled and conducted with heightened security, but no further incidents. Miles stood at attention near the throne as Aranaya formally received the Crystal Crown, completing the transition of power that had begun so chaotically days before. The Void Fleet itself remained in orbit, its ships transformed into crystalline structures that no longer appeared threatening. Initial probes suggested the vessels were now empty husks, the collective consciousness either destroyed or fundamentally altered by the reflected counter-frequency. Dr. Vex, recovered from his transformation and deeply remorseful, provided valuable information about the Void Collective's nature and intentions. They had not been inherently malevolent, he explained, but rather a species that understood existence only through assimilation and uniformity. They had seen Celestian society, with its rigid hierarchies and emphasis on conformity, as an ideal candidate for elevation into their collective. The irony, Vex noted during one debriefing session, is that they might have succeeded if Celestia had not already been changing, becoming more accepting of differences, more open to new perspectives. He glanced meaningfully at Miles. If the Empress had not already begun to see beyond our traditional limitations. The question of Miles's status became a matter of intense speculation throughout the court. Officially, he remained designated as Arania's personal guard, but rumors spread about the nature of the life debt bond they now shared, visibly manifested in the crystalline star Miles wore and the matching symbol that had appeared among Arania's luminescent markings. 1 week after the coronation, Miles was summoned to the Empress's private study. He found Arania standing on the balcony, where they had almost confessed their feelings before the Void attack. Her gaze fixed on the transformed alien ships, still visible in the evening sky. "They're beautiful now," she observed as he joined her. "Like distant constellations." "Beauty from danger," Miles agreed. "A fitting monument to what happened." She turned to face him, her galaxy eyes reflecting the starlight. "The Earth Diplomatic Corps has requested your return. They cite the unprecedented circumstances and potential compromise of objectivity in your continued service here." Miles had been expecting this. Earth authorities had been uncomfortable with his close involvement in Celestian affairs from the moment they learned of his role in the crisis. "And what do you want, Your Majesty?" "What I want and what is possible may be different things." Her markings pulsed with complex emotions. "Your people fear what they don't understand. This connection between us." "They're not wrong to be cautious," Miles admitted. "What we share is unprecedented, as you once said. The life debt bond, the way it manifested during the engine surge. These aren't things that fit neatly into diplomatic protocols." "No," she agreed, a smile touching her features. "They certainly don't." Miles touched the crystalline star at his chest, feeling its warmth respond to her proximity. "I can feel you, you know, not just when you're in danger now, but all the time. A presence, a connection. As can I." She moved closer, her own matching star marking pulsing in rhythm with his. "Lyrix has been researching the phenomenon. He believes the counter-frequency somehow amplified the bond, transformed it into something new, something never documented in Celestian history." "So what happens now?" Miles asked, the question encompassing far more than just his diplomatic status. Arania's markings brightened with determination. "Now, Captain Carter, we do what neither of our species expected. We evolve." She gestured toward the city below, where reconstruction was already underway. "Celestia is changing. The old hierarchies are breaking down, not through revolution, but through recognition that our strength lies in diversity, in connection rather than isolation." "And us?" Miles pressed gently. "Us," she repeated thoughtfully. "I am proposing a new position to the Royal Council, Ambassador of Interspecies Relations, a role that would place you formally in my court, but with direct ties to Earth as well, a bridge between our worlds." "And personally?" Her galaxy eyes met his directly. "Personally, Miles Carter, I propose something far more radical, a relationship with no precedent, no protocol to follow, one we define ourselves, step by step." Miles felt the weight of the moment, the historical significance of what she was suggesting. A human and a Celestian empress, united not just by politics or duty, but by a bond that transcended both. "Your council will object," he noted. "Some will," she acknowledged, "as will your Earth authorities, Change is rarely comfortable for those invested in the status quo. But after facing the Void Collective, after nearly losing everything, I find I have little patience left for artificial limitations. She held out her hand, palm up, in the Celestian gesture of offered connection. What do you say, Miles? Are you willing to become part of something unprecedented? Miles looked at her outstretched hand, remembering their journey from formal guard and princess to something far more complex and profound. He thought of Earth, his home planet that now seemed strangely distant compared to the immediate reality of Arinaya's presence. And he thought of the future, uncertain, uncharted, but filled with possibilities neither of them could yet imagine. He placed his hand in hers, feeling the now familiar energy that passed between them, the tangible manifestation of a connection that had survived deception, danger, and near death. Yes, he said simply. I am. As their hands joined, the crystalline star at his chest brightened in harmony with her matching marking. Beyond them, the capital city of Celestia glowed in the evening light, its crystal structures refracting the setting sun into countless rainbows. And above, the transformed void ships shimmered like new constellations, silent witnesses to the beginning of something truly unprecedented. A love that transcended species, a connection that bridged worlds, and a future limited only by their courage to imagine it. In the heart of the Crystal Palace, a human guard and an alien empress stood together at the threshold of that future, ready to write a story with no precedent, a story that would change not just their lives, but the destiny of two civilizations, long kept apart by distance, difference, and fear. The guard who was supposed to protect her had indeed given the princess his heart, and in return, she had given him a world he could never have imagined, a world they would now build together.